Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today's date is May 2nd, 2011. Can we please have roll call?
Commissioner Ajamian? Commissioner Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Miller?
Present.
Commissioner Yao?
Present.
President Chan?
Present.
Item 2A, approval of the April 4th, 2011 meeting minutes.
I had a few minor edits on those minutes. Some of them involve punctuation. The only one that was substantive was adjustment of a comment I had made that we should try to keep our goals, our goal formulation within expectations of what we budget. And if those are included, I would make a motion that we approve the minutes as amended.
Do we have a second?
Well, since I wasn't here, I just not comment on it.
I second.
We need an individual other than the president to second any motion.
Well, if it has the gavel
Then
to...
we better, we'll postpone it for next month then.
Okay. Item 3A, update procedure of public information requests. Christine Godinez.
Oh, it is there. I think procedure itself. We're looking at public records. This is public information.
President Chan and members of the Commission, I wanted to give you a very brief presentation regarding the Public Records Act because there have been occasional questions that come up during Commission meetings, so I thought for the benefit of this Commission as well as the benefit of the public, it'd be good just to have a very brief refresher regarding the Public Records Act and what it entails. So the first slide, what is a public record? A public record is any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristic. That's how it's defined by statute. So a public record is a very broad definition. It could be something handwritten, it could be typed, it could be an email, it could be a fax, it could be just about anything. It could be pictures, it could be sound, it could be a recording like the recordings of these meetings. All of those are considered public records under the Public Records Act. So, next slide. How could copies be requested? Well, they can be requested orally. You could contact anyone in the city and request a record. You can send an email to request a record, or you could request it in writing. Now, I should say that the city's strong preference is that members of the public make those requests to the city clerk's office, just because it's much easier for us to track and to respond quickly and timely to a request. So that's not a legal requirement, but it's certainly our preference. And the city clerk's office is set up so that they have a form that an individual can fill out and indicate exactly what they want. The inspection times for inspecting public records are all hours that the city is open. Typically, we have individuals obtain the records in the city clerk's office because they are the custodian of records for the city, and their hours are 7:30 to 5:30, Monday through Thursday, and then 8 to 5 on Fridays. A note about electronic records. Electronic copies of records, so those are considered records as well, whether it's an email or whether it's records that we maintain in an electronic format in our computer systems. So members of the public are entitled to receive those records as well, and we do make those available unless one of the statutory exceptions apply. For example, if there's a security interest at stake or the integrity of the document would be compromised by producing it, or if it's proprietary software that we don't have the right to release to the public, then in that circumstance we would. The city has 10 days to respond to requests for public records. So within 10 days of the receipt of the request, we will respond by indicating whether the records are existing, whether they're something that is not exempt from production and that we will produce, and then thereafter we'll promptly produce the records to the individual. There are some circumstances under which we can't respond within 10 days, and the Public Records Act gives the city the right to extend the deadline to respond by an additional 14 days if, for example, the request is voluminous and there's just so many records that we need to review and compile from multiple sources, or in some circumstances we need to consult with another agency who may also have ownership rights in those records. Or in some circumstances, we need to compile the data. So it may be a public record, but we may have to generate programming to create the record in a format that it can be given to another party. So in that circumstance, we would need to, under most circumstances, extend our deadline to respond. Sometimes we get a request that's a little hard to decipher, and it's our burden and our duty as a public agency to help out the requester. We're not here to play a guessing game with the person that's requesting the records. We're here to help and to make our records and business public and available, because that's the right of the public to know what's going on with their government. So we have to do our best to help this requester succeed. We have to make an effort to help them. So if a requester makes a request that's not focused and specific, which is what the law requires, then we need to make an inquiry and determine, if they let us know what they need the records for, and there's no obligation on the part of the public to do that, but if they'll let us know what they need the records for, then we can help them identify records that are responsive. Or, we can describe the technology and the physical location of the records. Or we can help them figure out ways to overcome barriers to production of those records. So it's our job to really assist the public with those records, and we do endeavor to do that. What about the cost? Now, there's certainly a cost to the city in terms of staff time in responding, evaluating. Any number of city staff can become involved in any given Public Records Act request, anything from locating the records to doing a legal review to physically copying them. The law allows us to collect the actual costs of duplication, which is 10 cents per page. We don't charge for the cost of staff time in filing the records. We do charge postage if the requester wants to have the records mailed to them, but other than that, it's 10 cents a page. There are some statutory exceptions to that where the cost may be more. For example, certain payroll records, I believe it's 25 cents a page, but the general rule is 10 cents. If we have to undergo efforts to create a program to extract records or to create a record for you, then we will charge the actual cost per the Public Records Act. And we always give a quote in advance. We don't simply charge you. We will let you know this is what our cost is expected to be. If you'd like us to go ahead and compile the record, we request a payment up front. And then if the cost turns out to be less than that, well, we will refund the difference. And if it's more than that, then we need to go ahead and ask for the additional amount. So what if there's no existing record containing the data? We talked about electronic records. So if there's a record that can be created through compiling or creating programming, we can do that, provided that we're reimbursed for the cost, because otherwise the cost is borne by the other ratepayers. If there's simply no public record, then we will let the individual know that there is no responsive public record. It's important to note that the Public Records Act does not require that we create lists or respond to questions or prepare reports at the request of a member of the public. We like to help out where we can, but our time is limited, so we are responsive to the degree that we're able to do so, but under certain circumstances we do need to charge for our time.
But again, it's when programming is involved, right?
Exactly. And on the next page, I've inserted the code section which talks about this issue. And it says, the requester shall bear the cost of producing a copy of the record, including the cost to construct a record and the cost of programming and computer services when necessary to produce a copy of the record, when either of the following applies. And there are two situations where that would apply. The first is, for example, if someone were to request a report that we produce on a periodic basis. Let's say they want an annual report, which we produce in April, but they're requesting it in August, and they'd like the information through August. Well, we haven't necessarily prepared that report because we do it pursuant to a regular schedule. So we're happy to put that together, provided that that individual will pay the cost of us preparing the report not on our time frame. And that's one of the allowances within the statute. The second would be whenever we're required to do data compilation, extraction, or programming in order to produce the record. So under that circumstance, if we've got to write a special program in order to extract the data from our system, then that would be a cost that we would pass on to the requester. So who can be served with a Public Records Act request? We talked about this. It could be anyone in the city. You could make a phone call. You could send an email. Our strong preference is that these come through the city clerk's office because that enables us to respond in a timely fashion, and really it helps you, the requester, get your records more readily. So, but really anyone in the city can be served, and for that reason, we do take this very seriously, and we do provide training to city staff so that everyone in the city is aware of the Public Records Act and the time deadlines for response and the procedure. How does a public record differ from a subpoena? Well, subpoenas are generated during the course of litigation, so it's a very separate process. If the city were to object to a subpoena, we'd file our objections with the court. So they're alike in that in both cases records can be requested of the city, but Public Records Act is a separate process. There are some exemptions where records are not produced, and that would include preliminary drafts and notes. Those are not considered public records if they're not retained by the city in the ordinary course of business. Records pertaining to pending litigation or to a pending claim, again, those would not be records that we'd produce until the pending litigation is settled or otherwise, finally adjudicated. At that point, then they would become public records. Personnel records, medical records, records of those natures where there's a privacy interest implicated, those are records we would not produce. However, employment contracts are considered public records. An important one for Glendale Water and Power is the utility usage data section of the Public Records Act. We are not allowed to provide our customers' names, credit histories, utility usage data, and home address and home phone number, except under limited circumstances. Now, when someone signs up for utility service, they have an expectation that we're not going to give their information to a marketer. So we take that very seriously, and we're very strict about this particular rule. We can give the information to an agent or an authorized family member, to an officer or an employee of another government agency in the course of their official duties, upon a court order or a request by law enforcement for an investigation that they're undertaking, or where a utility customer, in the opinion of GWP, has used utility services in a manner that's inconsistent with local utility usage policies. That would be, for example, an energy theft situation. If the customer is an elected official who has authority to determine utility usage policies, then that individual's utility usage data and information could be disclosed with the exception of their home address. A council person's home address cannot be disclosed, or an official's home address, without their consent. The final situation where we could disclose the utility usage data would be if we undergo a balancing test and we decide that the public interest in disclosure outweighs the public interest in non-disclosure. But in all other circumstances, as I said, we're extremely strict. We do not disclose our utility usage data to others. There's many exceptions in the Public Records Act to disclosure. There are also exceptions outside of the Public Records Act under, for example, the Evidence Code, which provide for certain privileges. So we examine each Public Records Act carefully to make sure that we're not going to be violating the law by disclosing the records. There is also what's called the catch-all provision in the Public Records Act that says, after examining the specific exemptions that would apply, if on the facts of the particular case the public interest served by not disclosing the record clearly outweighs the public interest served by disclosure, then the record would be withheld from production. And you'll notice that this balancing test is weighed in favor of disclosure. It says that the public interest served by not disclosing the record clearly outweighs the public interest served by disclosure, and that's because the public does truly have a right to know the business of the government, and so we balance that in favor of disclosure where possible. The final section of my presentation is what can the requester do if the records are not produced? Well, certainly they have a right to go to court and to enforce the Public Records Act and to compel us to respond if we haven't provided a response to their request. And for that reason as well, we take this very seriously. We do respond to the record requests, and we take this very seriously, knowing that there's indeed a threat of court action if we do not comply. With that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Any? Go ahead.
I have no comments. Thank you. It was an excellent
Yeah.
presentation. Thank you for the information.
Thank you. I have no questions.
I have a couple questions. What happened, in most of these cases, there are, at least at minimum, there's the cost of copying, which you estimated at anywhere between 10 and 25 cents a page, depending on what the record is, I suppose. What happens if the requester is a low-income someone who is low income and cannot afford those costs? Are there any provisions to accommodate that? Just like, for example, when you have a candidate who can't afford to pay the candidate statement in the elections booklet, there's a process by which to apply for a waiver in order to level the playing field.
Well, first to clarify, it's 10 cents a page, and it would only be different than that if there was a statutory provision that called for a different rate, and the only one that comes to my mind right now is for payroll records. There's no provision, to my knowledge, in the Public Records Act that provides for a low-income rate or an exemption, but the right is either to copy the records or to come and inspect them. So the alternative would be to come to the city and take a look at the records, and they could take actually all the time they wanted to do that. So if someone couldn't afford to make the copies, they could do that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question has to do with, on occasion, there are emails that are exchanged between commissioners, for example, on this commission. Usually it's limited to logistical details, but nonetheless, they are electronic communications that happen. To what degree are those subject to public records regulations?
That's an interesting question. I mean, this commission is a city commission, so, I haven't researched the issue, but I would imagine that those would be. Get back to you on that.
Okay, and I think further clarification, guidance, more importantly, it would be great, just so as we communicate sometimes for the sake of convenience amongst commissioners, it would be good to know what parameters we should stick to in those sorts of communications.
Mm-hmm. And I believe Scott Howard may have touched upon that in his AB 1234 training. I'm not certain because I didn't attend this last one, but we typically ask commissions to avoid email communications because of the possibility of a Brown Act violation, in that it could constitute a meeting outside of our regularly scheduled meetings.
Right.
I have a few questions. Yeah, I have a few questions myself. Commissioner Amin brought some good points. So, do we have any precedent-setting policies or procedures that we follow to be consistent with other cities?
In terms of responding to the Public Records Act? Or?
Yes, in terms of disclosure and what records we're willing to provide the public or withhold.
Well, everybody's bound by the same law, which is the California Public Records Act, so it applies to all California public entities, state and local. So, and there are a series of court cases interpreting the provisions. So we abide by those court decisions as well as the letter of the law and the statute. So to the extent that other cities are doing differently, we sort of deviate from them there. But I don't know, other than that we don't have a concerted effort to confer with other agencies to see how they're responding.
But just to be consistent, if we see that other cities are disclosing some records that maybe our city have withheld in the past, would we use that, or can the public use that as a reason why Glendale should maybe disclose those records?
They could certainly assert that, and I imagine that they would if they were in a situation where Glendale was not disclosing something and every other city was.
Right.
But I haven't seen that to be the case.
But there hasn't been a case like that where Glendale withheld something where other cities disclosed.
Not to my knowledge. I'm sure there are certain circumstances where cities differ in how they respond, but I'm not aware of any situation that comes to mind.
Okay. And can you give us some past cases where the records were requests pertaining to this commission? Do we have any knowledge of that? And what were they?
Records specifically pertaining to the GWP Commission?
Or GWP in general? Can you give
Well,
us
there are
some-
any number of requests. I mean, there are a lot related to the automated metering project because that's of great interest to the public, understandably. Records relating to expenses incurred by the department, particularly, in relation to the budget. Those are two that come immediately to mind. But it could be just about anything.
But to your knowledge, there hasn't been any records requests from emails or communications between commissioners or staff or any kind of...
No, but oftentimes records are written very requests are written very broadly where they ask for any document. So we would read that to include any emails. So to the extent there are emails that are responsive, we will go ahead and include those in our response.
But so far, there hasn't been any disclosure through the commission.
Commission emails, I would have to look into that, but I'm not aware of any, certainly. And I've been handling the public records requests for GWP specifically for about 1.5 to 2 years now.
Thank you.
No other questions? We have a speaker. Mr. Milano?
Commission President Chan, Commissioners, and City staff, my name is Herbert Molano. I am one of those individuals who makes periodic requests using the California Public Records Act. I do roughly 2 per month as I try to dig into some of the operations of the city to try to get a further understanding that it normally is not available through the usual reports produced by the city, such as the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, through the budget, and if I want to dig into some additional information that I think is publicly relevant. I don't do it out of simply to spend my time. I do it usually to try to identify how policy is created and executed. The reason why the California Public Records Act exists is because government, for a long time, and to this day, are usually very reluctant to provide the transparency required to allow the public and the stakeholders to understand what's going on. I can tell you that prior to the disclosure that occurred in the Los Angeles Times with the City of Bell, activists in the City of Bell had asked me for assistance in doing an analysis and evaluation of their CAFR. And even getting that simple document that is normally published every year was incredibly difficult. So we cannot simply use an example, the type of cities that are going to be hell-bent to deny the public basic information. And so I do likewise with some of the information that I requested for the City of Glendale. And I want to emphasize this, that a lot has changed since the law was originally introduced and passed. And that is that the way we access information today has changed significantly with regard to the use of computerized software, query languages, report writers, and so forth, that makes it fairly easy to generate an analysis report. For a long time, the Glendale Water and Power, on a quarterly basis, produced a report on customer service. You know, how many individuals were behind, how many customers calls were received. This was a periodic report that this commission received that allows us to get a sense of how difficult it was for the general public to bear the current rates. And as you know very well, in the last 3 to 4 years, it's been very tough for the general public with the significant increase in the unemployed and the underemployed and the continual high rates and increasing rates that we had in both water and power until the small decreases in electric rate this past year. And so one of the requests that I've made was a request to get a report on the number of delinquent bills and 48-hour notices. Now, it would be a lot easier if I could come in and present it to you, and you, in your position representing the public, make the request to the staff to generate an analysis report that I think, and I can make a case that it is pertinent for your review. But when you don't do that, and I make a request, then they assign to me a significant charge for getting those reports. In the case of that 48-hour notice for zip code 91205, the original request from me was to pay $2,000 to get that report. I felt that that's a report that this commission should be getting every month to figure out how is the public bearing this downturn in the economy and the high utility rates. So I do a lot of research from other cities, try to get a comparison. Eventually I was charged $200, and thanks to you, Mr. Armenian, and Councilman Draven, allowed me to receive some information. But alas, the information was commingled with so much other stuff that I really couldn't use it effectively to really get at that information that I needed. And I think that we need to revisit how we use the California Public Records Act in lieu of the fact that people are trained on the use of report writers, that the software comes in a way that it is very easy to use and easy to extract information that could be relevant for the general public to know, and for us to report on and write articles and essays with regard to how we feel the utility is working. If we depend only on the very limited range of the information that is provided just by giving us a copy, I think it limits significantly the quality of information that we need to make a proper analysis. And it is my hope that this commission can lead the way, either by accepting directly a request from the public to ask for certain pertinent information, or to ensure that the GWP uses those report writers and the people trained to use them to provide adequate information to the general public. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Milano.
Item 3B, Smart Grid Update. Craig Keenan.
Madam President, Commissioners, Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. Oh, there we go. So I'm here to give a project update. On April, go to the next slide, please. On April 20th, I went up to the California Energy Commission at their business meeting, which we were to receive $1 million grant to support our smart grid project, and the commission was very supportive. They voted 4-0. There was 4 members present. The money is to be used to support personnel costs on this project for up to 3 years. It doesn't require any additional commitment on our part. It's just actually reduces our commitment to the DOE from $31 million down to $30 million. So it's just money for us to help us in our project. The next item I have to talk briefly about is we had the Thai Provincial Electric Authority came to visit a few days ago, and they wanted to learn about our smart grid project. We were very happy to have them. There was about 16 people from the utility there. They're a very large utility, a lot bigger than us, but they did still come to see us to see how to do this. They're state-owned. They serve about 99.4% of Thailand. There's 71,000 villages, 12 million customers. And their project's considerably bigger than ours. It's $13 billion U.S. But we were happy to have them. They asked a lot of great questions, and we spent 2 or 3 hours with them. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Glenn, or no? Okay. And then just a few days ago, again, we met with Southern California Edison. They're installing the same electric system as we are. We have the same smart meters, the same meter data management system. They're dealing with a lot of the same issues for home area network, in-home display programs. And we met with their team to talk about our common interests and how we might work together going forward and help each other out, because that's the big part of the smart grid is customer involvement, and without that, we don't get the benefits. So we really need to work with others who have a lot more resources actually than us. So they have testing facilities and the like. As far as our meter installations, We are now over halfway there. Actually, we're at closer to 58% installation, and our electric's still a little bit ahead of water, but electric's at 61%, water at 52%. We're closing that gap, and in the next couple months, they should be both on the same track and finish up end of the summer. So. Total project budget and expenses. The DOE project is $51 million through March of 2013. Our project so far through the end of March we've spent $28.3 million. So we have a ways to go on the project. As you can see, though, we're getting back on track. When we had the delay towards the end of last year on the meter installation, we're picking back up and getting back on track there. In terms of the water, so the original project estimate was about $16.9 million. I actually think that's a little bit high, but that's what we had, so we'll just stick with that. Our expenses through March are $9.5 million. We just had a large meter order of over $1 million, so we'll see that number creeping up towards where it should be starting at the next meeting. And that's basically the update. I'd like to remind people to follow us on Twitter and Facebook and online and get the most recent updates. And I can answer any questions.
Going back to the first slide on the CEC, you talk about the grant to support personnel. Could you give us a sense of what personnel you're talking about?
Staff support. For administrative reasons in the way they wanted to structure their contract, they wanted us to pay for our GWP staff assigned to this project, and that's what that is going to be used for.
So does that cover, for example, your cost as a individual supporting it, and then
Yes.
that frees up headcount for application somewhere else?
Right, yes.
Should make more trips up there.
That's originally we were going to use it for meters and stuff, but there's so much different red tape associated with buying materials and things like that. This is just straightforward. You send them the cost and the hours, and they like that. So,
Do they give these sorts of grants to others?
SMUD received a similar $1 million grant, and I think they're the only two smart grid projects so far that have received these grants.
Thank you.
This is in addition to the original
Yes.
grant amount that we got. Okay, that's great. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Keenan. It's a great update. And I'm more interested in the partnership or potential partnership with Edison. Can you elaborate on what kind of agreement we would have with them and what kind of tests or pilots we would proceed if that agreement goes through?
We haven't gone there. We just sat down to talk about just a conversation about what we were doing, about what they were doing, and how we may work together in the future. We're not thinking about those kind of things so far. But
That was just interesting because we're an electric utility and they are too, and our territories don't really overlap. So I wasn't sure what kind of partnership or leverage agreements we can have with them. What do you see as the potential opportunities?
Well, if we identified vendors for in-home displays that we would work with together, they're a lot bigger. They have 4 or 5 million customers, so whatever we might buy, I would think, going in with them, we get a better price than if buying it for, a small utility. Similar to what we do with SCAPA. You get 13 municipal utilities together to buy some, you get a better price. But they have testing facilities, and just the information sharing we can get from them will be a big help. So.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I had a few questions. It looks from your presentation that you're on schedule and under budget for both the water and power side, right?
Yes.
Okay. On slide 7, I noticed that you're underspent by some $7 million, and we still have a couple of months left. You mentioned $1 million will be incurred here in the next month or so. Do we still expect to spend the full amount?
I don't see us spending the 16.9. It's probably closer to 15.
What might be the fate of the money that is underspent?
This is the water budget. I wouldn't speak to.
Or can we comment on that?
I'll make a quick comment.
Yeah.
Anything that's not expended in this project will go back either to the water or electric capital budgets. Both of them, as you'll see later on, we've already pushed out, so it would be a welcome addition to what we have. So it would go back and go towards other projects.
We'll see it then in the budget presentation, I take it?
Well, we're not going to show it as such because we're still, at the moment, projecting that these two projects will spend what we've budgeted. But should they not, and it looks like water may not, then we'll take that money and may accelerate a project or two.
Okay. Of course, we initiated this project with the expectation of certain benefits. Do we have any operating experience so far indicating that those expectations have been confirmed, or is it still too premature to say that?
I think it's premature. If you were.
Well, on the water side, we've got leak detection.
We do have leak detection. We have some things there. We filed a metrics and benefits plan with DOE, and then in a few months we'll start reporting against that and see where we go from there.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thanks.
That's it. Thank you. Do you have a speaker? Mr. Milano?
Commission President Chen, members of the Commission and city staff, my name is Herbert Molano. I have a question, an inquiry with regard to the subcontractors used for the installation of the water meters and electric meters. Due to some circumstances that occurred with my bill, I started making further inquiries, and one of the individuals that I contacted mentioned to me that the subcontractors has brought in staff or employees from another state. I don't know if that's true, but my concern is that if it is to me kind of a concern, since we already have our own unemployment, and it is through our, should we say, the city's initiative that we got in this project for the city of Glendale moving forward. And I know that I have some tenants who are electricians and skilled professionals in the trades that are underemployed. So my thought was, did the city make a sufficient effort to ensure that the subcontractors were hired from local stock? I think it would have been the right thing to do, but of course I don't know for sure. So my question is, are the subcontractors hiring employees and brought in from another state to do these installations?
We should.
Mr. Steiger, I believe in our contracts, don't we have good faith efforts and
We do.
requirements such as those? Okay.
I believe what Mr. Milano is referring to is our meter installation contractor, who is based in another state, and certain supervisory personnel have come in from the other state, but much of the workforce has been hired right here. In fact, interestingly, we've hired graduates of the Verdugo Power Academy, which we jointly run with Glendale College. So, in fact, it's been a double benefit. It's not only local people, but it's local people that we are helping to train for future positions. So while yes, the contractor is based in another state, and there are some supervisory people, much of the workforce is local.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And to clarify, I don't think that there is a subcontractor. Is that correct, Mr. Steiger? I think it's just UPA, the contractor.
UPA, that's correct.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 3C, update, groundwater supplies, Peter Kavunas.
I would like to mention, Ms. President and fellow commissioners and Director Steiger, I'm an employee of the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which, like the City of Glendale, is a party to the adjudicated agreement regarding the use of the groundwater basins, and consequently, seeing a conflict of interest, I will recuse myself and step in the back during this discussion.
Commissioner Miller, my perception is that at least the presentation, it's perfectly okay for you to stay. The information I'm presenting is known to the public, and I don't think it's a conflict. It's anything that gets discussed beyond that may put you in conflict.
I will step out as per my previous statement.
Oh, yeah, Commissioner Miller can certainly stay in the room if he chooses, but as per previous discussions, he would recuse himself from participation. But it's up to you. If you want to step out of the room, you can do that.
I'll step out of the room, I'll step in the back, and then I would kindly ask somebody to call me back in when the topic's over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, good evening. I'm Peter Kabunas, the Assistant General Manager for Water with Glendale Water and Power. I'm here to give you some information on groundwater and the way it's been adjudicated in the past, the challenges that we have managing our share in Glendale. With that brief background on the information, the basin that we're in, George, give me a couple of clicks, is called the Upper Los Angeles River area. That indicates an entire watershed that encompasses a large number of acres, 328,000 acres. And in that, you can see there's 122,000 acres of groundwater basin, and the remainder, over 200,000 acres of tributary hills and mountains, which do not hold water in and of themselves. That area is split into 4 groundwater basins: San Fernando Basin, Sylmar Basin, Verdugo Basin, and Eagle Rock Basin, shown in that order from largest in size to smallest in size. And you'll see in the next slides there is a significant difference in size. In terms of location, you can see where we are, of course, in the state of California, within LA County. That purplish area that you see is titled Ulara, Upper Los Angeles River area again. And the next slide will focus in on that same purplish area is shown in light blue here, and shows watershed area, which is really the area that captures a drop of water if it were to fall within that boundary. Zoom in on the next slide, you'll see some more topographic features you're more familiar with. Let me see if I can point with the laser pointer. You can see bounded by the Santa Monica Mountains to the south. Here's the Verdugo Mountains, and the San Gabriel's are up here. Also San Rafael Hills on that side. And you can see the 4 basins. The San Fernando Basin is the largest of the 4, Verdugo Basin, Sylmar Basin, and the very small Eagle Rock Basin. Next slide will show you where the city of Glendale is located. And you can see we straddle the San Fernando Basin and Verdugo Basin, which is why we have water rights in both of those basins. The entire Ulara was adjudicated by a court judgment that concluded approximately 20-some years of litigation, and in that 5 parties were given rights to pump from those basins. The City of Los Angeles, City of Glendale, Burbank, and the City of San Fernando were the 4 cities, and then the Crescenta Valley Water District is the other entity that can pump groundwater from those areas. Again, shown in order of largest to smallest in terms of rights. But by far, the City of Los Angeles has the lion's share of the water rights in the area. The final judgment was signed in 1979, and Los Angeles used a doctrine that's called the Pueblo Rights Doctrine. In other words, since the land was deeded to the City of Los Angeles by the King of Spain, they were here as a pueblo, they got all the water rights. And basically, a drop of water that falls in the basin belongs to Los Angeles. The cities of Burbank, Glendale, and San Fernando, along with Crescenta Valley Water District, were given some limited rights because they had been here and had exercised some limited pumping over time. The judgment is overseen by a water master, which may sound to you like a mythical creature, but once you get used to this language, it's basically someone appointed by the court to oversee and make sure that the 5 parties pump what they're supposed to pump and no more, and that if there's disputes, they get handled. If there's water quality issues, they get handled. The person serving in that capacity was Mr. Mel Blevins for the first 24 years of the judgment. He was a staff member of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. When he retired, he actually stayed on as a consultant, was replaced by another DWP employee, Mr. Makowski, who served for 5 years, and then he was replaced by a third water master who, in a change of course, is actually an outside consultant. Up until that point, the costs for the water master, because he was staff of DWP, were borne by LA DWP. From now on, the costs are being shared by all 5 parties. and we've very amicably reached an agreement where we pay proportional to our water rights, which means that still Los Angeles pays the lion's share, but Glendale still picks up the cost. We actually carry, as a city, we carry the contract with the water master because our access to city council and our ability to contract is a lot simpler than Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. The court retains oversight through the water master, and in terms of administrative procedures, we file an annual report May 1st. We actually approved that this morning. We got an extension because May 1st was a Sunday. And the parties report to the court on a quarterly basis. Our attorneys, Ms. Godinez and Ms. Martirosyan, make the appearances on our behalf. Sometimes staff may go as well to report and answer any questions the judge may have. Now, focusing in a little bit on the San Fernando Basin, Glendale's water rights consist of import return water. That's a term that stands for 20% of all the water that we deliver to our residents within San Fernando Basin is water that we get credit for, that we can pump at a later point in time. In addition to that, we get 5,500 acre-feet of what's called physical solution water, and that's another term that's perhaps a little arcane, but it was part of the judgment, and what it stood for was that since at the time of the judgment, Glendale had wells, physical facilities in the ground already invested, there needed to be a solution to what to do to those wells. So the solution to the physical problem is known as physical solution, and it translates to Glendale having the right to pump 5,500 acre-feet per year. And within Glendale, there were the two parties that also had wells and were given physical solution rights to pump. When they pump their water, it gets charged against our stored water credits, which is our bank account in the San Fernando Basin. Anything we may not pump in 1 year remains there, and it gets pumped with a minor deduction of 1% for losses to the basin. The other parties in the San Fernando Basin, Los Angeles gets similar 20.8% of all delivered water, and they have 8 physical solution pumping parties, and they also get stored water credit. Burbank gets 20%. They have 2 physical solution parties, and they get stored water accounts as well. This is for the San Fernando Basin. This is a table out of the Water Master Report that shows you, again, the 3 parties that have the right to pump on the left side, and then each of the city of Los Angeles has these parties that have physical solution rights. There is the city of Glendale with 5,500, and again, within Glendale, we have those 2. Angelica Healthcare no longer pumps. Forest Lawn pumps on occasion, and so when they pump, that gets charged against our stored water credit. So once again, looking at the San Fernando Basin, this map shows you in dots where the wells are by the 3 parties, LA, Burbank, and Glendale. And you can see that most of them are on the east side of the basin. That part of the basin has the thickest alluvial fill and is the place where it's easiest to get groundwater from. The next slide shows you a little bit of a zoom in, specifically in the Glendale area. And the next few slides will focus on that area. You're familiar, of course, with the 134 and the 5 as major landmarks to orient yourselves. You'll see we have 4 wells on the north, 4 wells to the south. Those were drilled to pump contaminated groundwater and pump it to a treatment plant to remove volatile organic contamination when EPA came up with that solution for the cleanup of that portion of the basin. This slide shows you the VOC contamination, volatile organic compounds, which in Glendale in the area is mostly TCE. There's two compounds that are called VOCs. TCE is one of them. That's the dominant one that we have. You can see the plume of contaminants flowing south following the Los Angeles River. Our groundwater wells are, the north well field is there, the south well field is over there. They're there to intercept the plume, extract contaminants, and then send them to the treatment plant. In addition to that, we found that we also have chromium contamination. Not surprisingly, it follows the TCE contamination as well, and it follows the flow of groundwater, which again follows the flow of surface water, and it is intercepted by our well fields to the north and to the south. Our treatment, this is a schematic. Again, the well fields to the north and to the south pump into a treatment plant, and from there, the treated water gets put in the distribution system and is blended with Metropolitan Water District water to further dilute anything else, and we successfully meet all federal and state regulations. That's a photograph of our Glendale water treatment plant, again, there to remove TCE. You can see this slide shows you the groundwater extractions over time in the San Fernando Basin, starting with the year 2000 on the left, at which point we were not pumping. The groundwater treatment plant had just been built. There were some concerns about chromium at the time, which kept the treatment plant inoperable for 2 years. Once we resolved those issues, we started pumping, and our goal is to pump approximately 7,000 to 7,500 acre-feet per year from that. We've been able to do that for the most part. We had a couple of years where we had to sort out some operational issues. The plant was new, and like everything else, you need ways to optimize how an operation like that goes on. If you couple this with the discussion about stored water rights, we had not pumped prior to this for approximately 15 to 20 years. So in the meantime, we were accumulating stored water credits. Once we started pumping, we are pumping more than we accumulated in any given year. So we're actually diminishing our stored water credits on an annual basis. The groundwater levels at our wells are staying fairly static. We are not seeing the result of the drought or the result of anybody else pumping more or less over time. Of course, the scale shown here is from ground level at 0 all the way down to 500 feet. There is the water level at one of the wells. And the next slide will show you that zoomed in a little bit. Of course, you see a little more variation, but really from the high to the low, the difference is maybe 10 or 15 feet. And it's, from our point of view, that's negligible. It's showing very steady groundwater levels. We're not seeing any impacts. This slide shows you the stored water credits, again showing you how we were accumulating until we started pumping, and then a slow but steady decline over time. We are now we have about 50,000 acre-feet, which is plenty to last us for at least another 20 years of stored water credits, because again, every year we put some water in and we take just a little bit more out. So this steady decline will continue. In terms of cost, this is a very cost-effective operation for us. It costs us about $62 per acre-foot to get 1 acre-foot of groundwater taken out. Since the treatment is paid for from the Superfund solution, we're not paying for any of the treatment. All we pay for is the lifting cost of $62. Compare that with a water rate from Metropolitan Water District of $744. So it's a really good deal from our residents, and we try to maximize that. We try to keep it pegged at maximum production all the time. The concerns that came up with the second water master, he had concerns about the overall water that is stored in the basin. So he highlighted the need to conduct a safe field study. I gave a brief update to the Commission on this before. The concern led to an agreement among the three parties, and the three parties hired a consultant to perform the study. We had a court agent, and we had a technical committee. Each of the three parties had advisors to look at, technical advisors to look at the study. The study was left as a draft. At the end of the day, there was disagreement on how to do a safe field study, and the biggest disagreement centered around the lack of complete data. The new water master reviewed the data and the proposed pumping by the parties, and he believes that the safe field study does not need to be finalized. And certainly from our point of view, it's not a threat. We are seeing our water levels are staying fairly flat over time. We're not concerned about not having enough water in the basin. The court agreed with, has been fully briefed and agreed with the water master. And the agreement with the other parties is that by the end of this period that we're in 2018, we will redo the safe field study, and in the meantime, we'll collect missing data that will fill the gaps that are needed to do an acceptable safe field study. Moving on, the Verdugo Basin is a little bit simpler in terms of our water rights. The Verdugo Basin yield is shared by the City of Glendale and Crescenta Valley Water District. And we have a portion, 3,856 acre-feet per year that we can extract. Crescenta Valley has 3,294 acre-feet per year that they can extract. There is no stored water provisions. In this basin, if you don't pump it, it's gone. And so that changes the way this basin is managed into a much different scenario. If you remember from the earlier map, that's the general shape of the Verdugo Basin. Again, I don't expect you to see this in detail. We'll zoom in just a second. But you can see there's wells that are scattered a little bit on this side, and our wells are mostly to the south. The next slide shows you a zoom in. And again, you can see Crescenta Valley has some of their wells up here. Our wells are located here, some new wells, some old wells, and then two wells here that feed our Verdugo Park water treatment plant. We have drilled a new well in the Rock Haven Sanitarium site, and rehabilitated a new well that is not shown on this map. It's a little bit to the north on Foothill Boulevard. And we expect that with those two wells, we'll be able to increase our capacity to produce from the Verdugo Basin. Now, the basin itself is smaller, steeper, and has less water to give us than the San Fernando Basin, but we still want to get all our water right from it if possible. This shows you the same period of time from 2000 to present, the history of our extractions. You can see that at some point we pumped 2,300 when water was a little bit lower, less available. Excuse me. We were not able to produce as much. We peaked at about 2,600 acre-feet in 1 year, and in the last few years we've had a little bit of a decline in groundwater levels. The last year is shown as lower, but that's not a complete year's worth of data. That's 9 months worth of data. Similarly, a hydrograph shows you that the water levels are staying fairly static, although you'll notice this scale is from 0 to 1,300. So when you zoom in on this one, you'll see there's more variation. It goes from about 1,100 of a high to about 1,160. So we've had a 50-foot drop. The last couple of years, certainly the last year of rainfall, has helped recover groundwater levels in the basin. That affects the production in Verdugo Basin a lot more. The cost, because the basin is so much more difficult to get water out of, it costs us $670 per acre-foot of water. It's still cheaper than Metropolitan Water District, but it's pretty expensive water. The margin and cost will increase next year because Metropolitan will go from $744 to $794 per acre-foot. So it's still viable for us to do it, and it'll become even more viable next year. And especially as we bring on 2 new wells to produce more water, we'll be able to bring the cost down actually per acre-foot. That's the end of the prepared presentations. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Yeah, just a few questions. Well, thank you, Mr. Kavunas. That's very interesting, and that's very in-depth. I appreciated that.
Pleasure.
Perspective. But just pretty much the simple bottom line is, do we have enough water to maintain the Glendale water supply and meet our strategic needs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We view groundwater along with recycled water as our local supplies, and we try to maximize those at all possible. The recent budget constraints have given us a little bit of a problem. Hydrology has given us a problem in the Verdugo Basin. With those 2 exceptions, we can maximize the local resources. We rely on Metropolitan Water District to meet the rest of our needs, and Metropolitan Water District has just lifted their restrictions. So from a water supply point of view, we're sitting very well.
What about the contamination aspect? Because I understand that based on some reports, the VOCs and the chromium contamination could be significant, where we might be limited in our extraction from our basin. How likely is that, and what can we do about it?
Well, anything's possible. From our point of view, we manage what we know, and the volatile organic contamination, we believe, has been managed very well. The EPA Superfund investigation that took place in the 70s and the 80s led to the construction of our treatment plant that effectively treats all the water that we produce, and treats it very well, and it's at no cost to Glendale. New threats may come up, for example, chromium, and as we see a threat come up, we'll take appropriate steps to deal with it. For chromium, we started back in 2002 a research effort that's the only one of its kind in the nation that will give us the ability to treat chromium, and even if concentrations were to go higher, we'll have developed the tools. We're also working very closely with EPA to make sure that, again, Glendale doesn't have to pay for treatment of contamination caused by others. So we're working with them to make sure the appropriate parties are paying for that.
So if I understand this correctly, if we, let's say, assuming that we don't have the basin supplies at all, most of the supplies will come from MWD, so there's no chance of the residents of Glendale losing any water or being able to have water. So is that a correct statement?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I think I view our groundwater supplies as being very reliable, and anything we can't meet with groundwater and recycled water we can get from MWD.
Is there a limit to what we can get from MWD, or is it just a cost-benefit part where we try to use the least costly water, and that happens to be from a basin?
There is no limit to what we can get from MWD. The only limit is cost.
Right.
And at this point, we are managing to make our purchases from MWD. Because we manage our local resources well, we only pay the lower tier of MWD cost, the Tier 1.
And what is the maximum groundwater that we can obtain to minimize MWD imports?
The San Fernando Basin, we are limited by the capacity of the treatment plant, which is about 7,500 acre-feet per year. Verdugo Basin, we are limited by our water right and our extraction capacity. The most we could get there is 3,856 acre-feet. You add those together, we can get about 11,000 acre-feet per year. Glendale's demand last year was 28,000 acre-feet per year. So the remainder, about 17,000 acre-feet, is what we purchase from MWD. In the past, when the demand was higher, our purchases from MWD had gone higher.
Okay, so there's a limit to how much we can expect to get from the basin, so we can't really assume that we can get most of our supplies from the basin because the demand is so much greater than what we can handle in the basins.
That's correct. In the old times, as Glendale was growing, groundwater wells were the only source of supply. But the population of Glendale, the water demands quickly exceeded that, and that's why Glendale was one of the forming member agencies for Metropolitan Water District, because the city's father saw the need to join Metropolitan Water District and augment the local supply.
Okay. And my final question is, what's the likelihood of this adjudicated rights be maybe transfer most of it back to LA DWP and having other member agencies losing those water rights? What's the likelihood of that, and how can we deal with it?
Well, it's hard to say. The first thing that would have to happen as a prerequisite would have to be a lawsuit that would open the judgment. At this point in time, neither of the three parties is interested in reopening the judgment. I think everybody's very happy with what they have and content with managing within what they have. So I don't believe there's a likelihood of a lawsuit reopening the judgment. So I don't think there's a likelihood of these water rights being reevaluated. And I defer to Christine Godinez.
I would agree with that. Because it's a settlement, it's settled at this point. So short of that judgment getting reopened, it's status quo as far as water rights.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
Any questions? No? Okay, I have a couple of questions. Thank you very much for your informative presentation. My first question is on the San Fernando Basin. You were showing one of these charts, and you mentioned that before 2001, we didn't extract any
That's correct.
water. And what's the reason for that?
The EPA Superfund investigation was ongoing.
Okay.
The investigation started in the 70s, actually while the judgment was still being debated in court. The judgment was settled in 79. The EPA investigation went through the 80s. But at that time, there was enough concern about contamination in the well water that the city of Glendale pumped nothing and bought all of its supplies, almost all of its supplies, from Metropolitan Water District.
But we kept on storing
Yes.
water there as credit.
Once the judgment went into effect and it gave us the right to store what we didn't pump, we weren't pumping anything. So every year we were banking water, which gave us a very comfortable bank account to begin with. By comparison, Burbank has run out of stored water credits. And so they need to find an alternative solution.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer. Next question is, so there were four basins that you mentioned in the beginning.
Yes.
Now, you've only covered San Fernando and the Verdugo.
Yes.
So what's happening with Silmar and Eagle Rock?
Well, in a short answer, we don't care because we don't have any water rights. A little longer answer is the Silmar Basin is shared, the water rights are shared between the City of Los Angeles and the City of San Fernando, and they need to manage the water rights between themselves as we do with Crescenta Valley Water District and the Verdugo Basin. Eagle Rock is very small, has very small yield. The water rights are owned by Los Angeles, and Los Angeles does not extract a drop out of it because it's not economically feasible.
I see. So Glendale only has rights for the two.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Any other questions? No? Okay. We have a public speaker. Mr. Milano, please.
Commissioner President Chan, members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Molano. I have a question with regard to our water availability in case of a disaster. I want to know if the GWP has any information in the event that we should lose the MWD supplies, how many days of water would the city have based upon its current supplies? Thanks.
Madam Chair, this, of course, is not the topic of my presentation today, but I can give you a general overall answer, and the answer is it depends. It really depends on when we lose the MWD supply, whether it's a planned outage or an unplanned outage, whether it happens in the summer or in the winter, even whether it happens in the morning when our storage is topped off, whether the evening when our storage has been depleted from daily use. So the answer is it depends. If you look at the worst case scenario, we believe that we have at least 4 days of storage. If you look under the best circumstances, we believe we have about 15 days of storage.
Okay, thank you.
How does that compare to other cities?
Everyone's different. Everyone's different, and it really depends on the nature of a particular city. Our demographic is such that if you have a city with a lot of irrigation demand, our irrigation demand is recycled for the most part, so it's not really affected by that. Pasadena was just out of water for 10 days because of a planned outage, and they had no trouble meeting that at all. Some cities you'll find may be able, or other member agencies that may not be cities, may be able to last 15, 20 days. Others, 3 to 4. But again, it's not as simple as the water shut off, how long can you last? If you know about it in advance, you can make arrangements with your neighbor cities and extend your ability to last. If you know about it in advance, you can top off your reservoirs. So it's really variable.
I think the nature of the question, though, was in terms of emergency preparedness, so that would mean no notice at all.
Okay, and have we lost power at the same time in this scenario?
Things possible. I
Right,
guess
that's
it's
my
scenario
point.
planning.
Right. So it depends.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item 4D, update, water rate redesign. Bill Fox.
President Chen and members of the Commission, I'd like to give you a brief update. As you recall, last meeting we did an extensive update on the status of the water rate redesign project. We had our consultants that we've retained come and give a in-depth study. So what we're going to do now is kind of update you as to what's happened since that point in time, and then go through and give you some additional information on steps that we need to take. The presentation will be in 4 parts. First, we'll talk about the actions that we've taken since the last briefing. And with that, we'll go through each of the elements that have taken place. We're going to talk about some of the data that's been analyzed since that point in time. Thirdly, we'll go through a rate design, and we'll talk about some of the obstacles and some of the opportunities that we have in our rate design process, and then go through and update you on the project implementation schedule. Actions taken since our last briefing include the model. The actual model that we shared with you at the presentation was only partially constructed at that point. The model has been completed at this time, is now operational, and has actually had data fed into it, so we're doing some scenario analysis as we speak. The historical consumption data has been migrated. Information that's taken from our customer information system has been put into the model so that we can better analyze our customer needs. The other element that we've added into the model is our net planned investment, and that's basically our CIP project. We're taking a look at our 5-year CIP funding requirements and have added that into the model so that we have an idea of not only our operating expenses but also the capital requirements. And in addition, we have spent considerable time going through and looking at our assumptions. We've done some refinement since that point. And finally, the project scheduling will give you a good in-depth knowledge of how that's progressing. The data analysis that we put together is basically taking a look at the consumption from our customer base And we've looked at it at several different levels. One, the customer class level, and we've gone down to the individual account level to better understand our customers' spending patterns and usage patterns. And then what we've done is we've done some detailed analysis on how they actually are using the water, the times of the year, and then compare that to the weather patterns. And then finally, we're looking at trying to embed that information into the model to make sure that we're taking a look at each element that will help give us the best answer to identify customers' needs. And again, the net plan investments being incorporated into the model, we're going out and taking a look at our CIP program over the next 5 years. On May 4th, that's this week, we're going through and we're having a work session with our consultants, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the various components of our rate design. As we indicated before, we're following rate design pattern that's been set up by the California Urban Water Conservation Council, and that's following a best practice where, in essence, 30% of our costs, in essence, are going to be fixed, 70% are going to be variable. So the customer, as they use less water, will not be charged accordingly. We're also taking a look at the reserve funding levels. Our city reserve right now for water is $11 million. That's what our reserve level is for the water fund. Through this design process, we're going to determine whether, in fact, that needs to be more or less or to remain the same. And then we're also taking a look at the strategy for implementing the different rate structures that are being talked about. And the strategy takes a look at the customer groupings, and we're going to see if we're going to go to the level of dissecting the single-family resident versus a multifamily resident, and then taking a look at the patterns by the non-residential customers. So all in all, we're taking a look at various strategies. So in essence, our work session is going to be scenario analysis and trying to identify the best way to provide what we consider a revenue-neutral solution. We're also, as part of the rate design, taking a look at the tiering of our structures. We've talked before about structures, and we may end up having different tier levels for different customer classes. Right now, we don't have that level of complexity, but because of the programming analysis that's been done, we're able to take a look and see if that, in fact, makes sense to go to that level of detail. And then, along with that, we're going to make sure that any changes that are going to take place will also be correspondingly changed in our water ordinance so that everything is correlated together. And finally, our project schedule itself. What we've done is we've identified what we consider the 7 remaining tasks in our schedule. Task 1, finalize our rate assumptions. That's actually happening this week. We anticipate the final analysis by the consultant will occur on May 23rd. And during that period of time between May 2nd and May 23rd, we're going to be working with the consultant to make sure that we can have a solution that meets the needs of the community. On June 6th, our next meeting, we will have a briefing for the Commission to let you know the results that have occurred. And based upon feedback that we received from the Commission, we anticipate a report can be finalized by June 13th. Thereafter, on June 27th, we would plan on meeting with the City Council, give them a briefing, and begin the Prop 218 process at that time. And then subsequent last step in the process, the new rate would be implemented approximately August 15th, 45 days. This is our remaining project schedule. We frankly think that it's a little bit on the aggressive side. There could be, through the various steps in the process, different information that comes to light and maybe some additional analysis to take place. But this is the game plan as we see it right now. With that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Few questions from me.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fox. That was a very good update. I was curious, with the commission briefing for next month, will the report or staff's update include a rate structure and what the tiers will look like for different classes?
That's what we anticipate having at that point, yes.
Okay, so once we get to see that next month, I was anticipating also a maybe potential joint session with the City Council to provide them a status update, but I didn't see this on this list because the fifth task shows that the City Council briefing is on June 27th, which is pretty much the time when they have to decide that to proceed with the Prop 218 process. Is there any way we can brief them before or in between the June 6th and June 27th date?
You bring up a very good point, and it's something that we should take into consideration. If, in fact, the Commission would like to have a joint study session with the Council, we could schedule that on the 27th. We would, of course, be subject to whatever the Council's schedule is on that date. But it would be a good idea to have a joint session. We could call it a joint study session to discuss this issue. So it would be a briefing not only for the Council, but yourselves who have already have seen a proposed approach prior to that time.
But wouldn't that delay the schedule further because then we would allow them some time to sink in and discuss the issue?
I would hope not. I mean, our goal is to implement it as soon as possible. But again, if something takes an extra week or 2 weeks, in the overall scheme of things, it's most important to get it right. So our approach would be to make sure that all the stakeholders that are involved in the process have had an opportunity to look at it and to get comfort with it and to move forward and hopefully move forward in a manner that will be welcomed by the community.
Yeah, unless you're planning to brief the council members in between and maybe a separate briefing, do you do like a one-on-one briefing with them so they're aware of what's going on so that they're prepared to make the decision on June 27th to do a go or no-go on Prop 218?
At this point, what we would anticipate is they would receive a copy of the report, and it would be a good idea to have a briefing prior to that point. But typically, they would receive a staff report and recommendations. So I don't anticipate a double briefing, but we would make sure that they're properly informed, and they would have to be comfortable before we move forward.
But yeah, I'd just like to give them enough time to make a decision rather than a one-day's notice to proceed with Prop 218 or not.
I definitely welcome your input, and I think at the next briefing that we have, we may need to revisit the schedule, and if in fact it takes a little bit longer, I think the most important thing is to make sure that all parties are comfortable.
Okay, thank you. That will be up to the Commission to decide.
Any other comments?
For the benefit of our viewers, because we keep coming back to this, but this topic overall, but in terms of where we started out from, can you recap briefly what the end outcomes that we're trying to achieve with the rate design, just so people have this presentation in some sort of context?
Well, it's going to be awfully difficult to do, but I'll give it my best. The city went through a process where, in fact, we needed to have a rate adjustment. In this last year, with the blessing of the Commission as well as City Council, we instituted a 3.8% net rate increase. With that, the direction that we received was to go back and to actually study the existing rate structure, which is what this process is here, is to make sure that we can come through with something that is going to be sustainable on the long-term basis. The existing rates that we have in place was considered just as an interim measure. This is to take a long-term view of how we should handle things on a going-forward basis. Our goal is to try to make this adjustment as much revenue neutral as possible so it will not impact the community as a whole. With that, though, there will be some winners and some losers. So those that conserve will end up being winners. Those that end up spending more in water, as far as using more water, will end up costing more. The end goal is to try to make it as much revenue neutral as possible. The outcome of that also will be contingent upon factors such as whether we're going to go to what's called a pay-go method for funding capital requirements in the future, or if, in fact, we are going to end up using bonding as a strategy in the future. So there's a number of variables that have to come into play. But it could, in fact, mean that there would be some rate increases that are in the offing, but at this point it's too soon to tell.
And I imagine one of the objectives is also to get us back on track in terms of delayed capital projects.
That is correct, and that's when we talk about the pay-go method. What we would like to do is, is in the rate structure itself have a component that would allow for adequate funding of future capital projects.
Final question is, in terms of the water transfer issue that was resolved, I assume that's all being factored into the overall rate design as well?
It is being taken into consideration not only here but also in the budget itself.
Thank you.
You mentioned revenue neutral twice. You meant revenue neutral in the sense that there's this 3.8% increase, right?
Our goal is to not have a large rate increase. The community has just had a rate increase. The funding requirements, not only from we do have certain limitations, as you well know. As Mr. Kavunas mentioned earlier, we're subject to a large portion of our costs through the Metropolitan Water District. As you know, they're going to be increasing their costs this next year. So inherently, there is going to be some increase because if the largest portion of our water production is coming from them, of approximately 60%, and they're raising their rates 7.5%, obviously there's going to be some impact to the community. Our goal is to try to minimize that, and we would like to keep it for those that are using less water or conserving. We don't want to have them be negatively impacted. But again, in the overall scheme of things, there's so many moving parts, it's very difficult at this point to say exactly what will happen.
But the ultimate goal of this whole exercise is to increase by 3.8%.
No.
No. Okay.
The ultimate goal is to try to put rates that are fair and equitable to all parties.
Okay.
The 3.8% increase already went into effect last year. That was, you may recall, last year we brought that in front of the commission. Commission, essentially after a lot of discussion, supported that. We took it to council, if I recall. Armenian, Biden in front of council.
Okay.
So that's already in place. What this will do, this will take a look at the actual structure of the rates themselves and restructure to look at things like incenting energy or conservation of water, different variations, and potentially decoupling a little bit of water use with how much we actually have to raise in that. So there's a number of issues that this will.
I see. Okay. Great. Thanks. Any other questions?
And are you also looking at integrating in terms of what sort of capacities the new meters, water meters, will allow us in terms of these sorts of programs, or is that at a later point?
No, the benefit of doing the study now is that we are at a point where very soon after having the study done, we'll be able to integrate much of that new data and manipulate it. So the model looks at that, the ability to use that data in a whole different way.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Next item.
Item 3E, budget review, Bill Fox.
I'd like to start off in saying that this is going to be a joint effort by myself and Mr. Steiger. We're going to share in the presentation. There are a number of elements related to the strategic plan, and he's going to cover, I'm going to cover some of the financial aspects, and Mr. Steiger is also going to cover some of the metrics and some of our comparisons with some of our sister utilities. So with that, we're going to let Mr. Steiger start.
What I'd like to do, as Bill mentioned, is do a quick review of where we are from an overall mission, vision, and values standpoint. Look at our strategic plan as it stands now, again, very quickly, high level. And then Bill will talk about our fiscal position currently and about where we expect to be next year with budget, both electric and water. I'll come back after that and review the comparative information, which I think you'll find very interesting. I know I have, for future challenges and impacts. As you recall, our mission is to be your trusted community utility. We continue with that mission. We believe strongly that that's important to us and to our community. Our vision, interestingly, we are currently revising our strategic plan. The vision statement will most likely be revised, not in intent, but to make it a little bit easier to understand, but to deliver reliable, high-quality, environmentally sensitive and sustainable water and power services to our customers in a caring and cost-competitive manner while creating a stimulating and rewarding work experience for our employees. That vision still continues. We are simplifying the statement, however. Our values continue as they are, and we think they're very, very important. In fact, they've helped us focus very much on the goals set forth in our strategic plan. And as you see in front of you, dedication to customer service, trustworthy and respectful, ownership's a large part of our strategic plan, teamwork, doing it right, and a philosophy of continuous improvement. I'm not going to review this entire scoreboard. We've done this before. However, this is up to date as of the end of the first quarter of this year. What I'd like to do, though, is point out the areas that we are currently revising. The design team that originally put the strategic plan together met last week for half a day. We're going to meet again. I believe it's next week. And what we are doing is looking at every piece of the plan, but focusing on those areas that have been impacted by various issues that are either under the control of GWP or not. And the biggest single issue that's impacted us has been the economic downturn. So what you see here are in the red areas particularly, these are the areas that we are revising the timing, goal itself in some cases, and you can see that they relate to items that generally have an economic impact, serving 2,500 acre-feet of recycled water. While we have the plan in place to do it, the economics are not there. Instituting a 2.5% PVC-like charge is something that basically we're looking to the state to do so, and the state is. But currently we've had very little ability to make that happen. So you can see these are in red. The issue of what we're doing with our power plant is something that we've taken a longer-term view, and that's why you see some red there. On the water side, some of the direct impacts are in our ability to replace miles of water line as we expected. Therefore, you see red completely in the scoreboard here. And in the budget, and this will now correlate to the budget, that particular goal has been pushed out quite a bit. Therefore, we are now changing the entire time frame, so the new strategic plan will account for that, so that we get back on track to something that makes sense. Again, the same thing applies on the electric side, primarily in our ability to upgrade the voltage of our system. While we're doing it, we're not doing it as quickly as we expected, so that will change. The one area that you can see pointed out right here, the very, very bright light, just in case you can't see it. The area of workforce, we've got some work to do. Economics, vacancy rates, a number of issues are challenges for us. So we're taking a hard look at what we need to do to improve the areas that we show here under workforce. So we're taking some different approaches. As I mentioned, we'll be back to you most likely in July with a much revised strategic plan recognizing these items. Again, some more areas within the city of Glendale. Again, we're trying to do more workshops, as Bill just mentioned. We're going to show that in our strategic plan. So that's where we are. Overall, however, much of our strategic plan is still on schedule. We've done, I think, a fairly good job under the conditions of meeting the goals that when we said we were going to meet them. So I'm pleased with that. But I want to make it clear that we will have a revised strategic plan that will align with our budget as of July. Over to Bill.
Before we get too much into the actual budget itself, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of give you a thumbnail sketch of where we are today. And this is where we project ourselves to be at the end of the year, both on the electric side and the water side. And this, in fact, is taking projections using our March 31st information, recorded information, and projecting through the end of the year. I guess most notable is the fact that we anticipate the total net income to be $4.6 million. On our electric side of the business, we anticipate a small loss of about $400,000. On the water side this year, we anticipate about a $5.1 million profit. And overall, for the utility as a whole, we anticipate a margin, if you will, of 1.9%. So it's relatively thin margin. I want to give you a little background on the electric side of the business, and probably the best way to do that is to talk about the number of meters. All in all, we have 84,892 customers, and 85% of those customers are residential. So I'll let you know that we are primarily I hate to use the word bedroom community, but in a sense we are, because we have such a high percentage of our customers as residential. And the other thing that's probably most notable is the fact that our customer base, if you look at year to year, it pretty much reflects that we're a built-out city. So we don't anticipate future growth spikes. It's going to be relatively pretty much the same. Taking the projected revenues that we shared with you earlier, I wanted to break it down into the types of revenues so you can have an idea of what the total revenue picture looks like. We have roughly $200 million in revenues projected for the fiscal year 2011. Of that, 78% of it is our retail sales. That means sales to our retail customers. The next biggest area is our wholesale operations, and we anticipate 15% of our revenues is coming from wholesale activity. That's an uptick from the way it was in the prior year. We've actually done more in the energy trading area, and as a result, we've had increased revenues, which also has had a positive impact on the bottom line. And then the other area where we have considerable revenue this year is in our grant revenue, and most notably it's the area of our smart grid, which we've been able to take advantage of the grant we've received from the DOE. To give you a thumbnail sketch of the expenses, the biggest area of our expenses is the actual production expense, which is the generation of the electricity itself, and then next is our transmission and distribution. So the two of those combined represent 74% of our costs. The next biggest area is our customer service, which is our call center, our billing operations, and our field operations that go out and check items in the field as they come up, as issues come up, which is $6.8 million. Depreciation represents all our major capital assets that are on a regular standard depreciation schedule, and depletion is actually related to our gas reserves that we have. And then the next biggest expense is the transfer to the city of $19.1 million, which is roughly 10% of our total expenses. We thought it would be interesting to share with you our sources of our electric production, and this is projected again through the end of the year. We receive 37% of it from organizations, and this is through SCAPA, which we own in conjunction with other entities, portions of power plants. So that represents 37%. And then 52% represents purchase power, long-term agreements that we have. Many are with SCAPA, some are not through SCAPA, but most of it is coming through purchase power agreements or jointly owned operations, with Glendale, our power plant, producing approximately 14% of our power. So we end up using the Grayson power plant more as a peaking unit because it's a higher cost to run than buying it through our other sources, either through the purchase power or through our SCAPA agreements. We wanted to share with you the energy resource mix, and this is to give you kind of an idea of where we get the generation from, and also to give you a perspective of some of the future challenges that we have. Currently, we have 19.7% of our portfolio coming through renewable resources, and we've identified those up there for you. We have a fair mix from geothermal, biomass, small hydro, large hydro, wind, and solar. In addition, we have options through contractual agreements on additional renewable resources at our availability that we are not currently using, but we do have when we need to approach them at that point. But what should be interesting is by the year 2020, we're required by the state of California to have 33% of our power coming from renewable resources. If we take a look at what we have right now, we are already at 26.9% of that 33% requirement. So we're well along the way of meeting that requirement. So I would think from our perspective, Glendale has been very strategic and placed ourselves very well in getting to that point. There's a downside to that, though, and the downside is that these renewable resources are actually more costly than traditional coal, natural gas, or nuclear power. The cost is about double than it would be for our other resources. So the challenge that we have is, as we go forward to fill the gap from our 26.9 to 33%, is that we do it in a cost-effective manner. We're hoping that there will be breakthroughs in technology that will help drive that cost down. The other thing that we are concerned with is that as we get closer to 2020, we're going to be competing with other utilities for these same resources, because this requirement is a state mandate, and that everybody's going to be in the marketplace trying to compete for these utilities. So the costs could go up from where they are now. This would definitely have an impact on our rates to our customers. But the good thing is that we've reached a large portion of our goal through our strategic planning efforts, and so the gap that we have is not as significant as some other utilities have to meet. We wanted to share with you our 4-year production trend, and this is the power that's produced. And when we say produced, it could be whether it's something that we buy on the open market, whether we produce it at the Grayson Power Plant, or we get it through one of our SCAPA arrangements. The point is, in this slide, you can see that in our 2 out years, 07, 08 to 08, 09, we actually have had decreased demand take place. And this year, there's somewhat of an aberration on our production. The blue lines represent our retail customers, production for our retail customers. If you look from year to year, you can actually see that there's a slight decrease that's occurring. There's less demand for the product. But if you look at the red band, that red band represents our wholesale trading activity, and that actually is taking up a greater percentage of our production. So we're taking advantage of our contractual agreements, and we're able to actually use that capacity that we have and sell it through the open market to make additional profit for the utility. The overall profit that we make helps keep our rates lower. I'd like to step back and take a look at the water side of the business for a moment. The water side very much mirrors the electric side in the fact that 88% of the water meters are residential. On the electric side, it was 85%. So again, it still shows that we're basically a community where people are residents here, and business is a smaller proportion of the total number of customers that are served. And we do reflect that we have pretty much a same steady state number of customers when you compare year to year. So again, this reflects that we're a built-out community. We have not had much change in any one of our customer classifications over the 3-year period. And going back further in time, that same relationship has existed. We wanted to give you an update of our projected water revenues. The water revenues that we are projecting for this year to be $42.2 million, and this is going to be slightly more than what we budgeted. It's about $1.9 million higher than we budgeted. And our biggest portion of our happens to deal with our potable water sales, which represents 86% of our customer revenues. Our recycled is at 3%, and that's an area that we definitely would like to continue to increase. And then as Mr. Kavunas mentioned, we have grants that we've received. The most notable is the Chromium 6 grant. And then the smallest portion of our revenues are capital contributions, where in fact property is deeded to the city as a result of water infrastructure put together by customers. Our expenses this year are going to be roughly $37.2 billion. The largest share of that happens to be in our production area, and that is $20.3 million, and that's the production, meaning the cost of water that's either purchased through Metropolitan Water District or extracted from our ground wells. And then the next biggest portion is 13%, or $4.7 million, happens to deal with the transmission and distribution, basically being able to transport the water into our distribution system and then making sure that it gets to our customers. Customer service operation is roughly $2.3 million. Again, we talked about the call center operation, the billing center, and then the field activity that goes along with making sure that the customers are properly served. And probably most notable that's been talked about a lot is our transfer. City transfer is $4.2 million, or 11% of our budget. This is something that will be no longer after this year. This is the final year in which there will be a transfer going to the city, to the general fund. We wanted to share with you volume of water sold, much like we talked about on the electric side. We wanted to share with you the dynamic that we have. If you go back to 7-8 and 8-9 and 9-10, you can see that we're actually having a decrease in our water sales. This year, we're actually projecting pretty much a levelized as far as the volume of water sold. So we anticipate it to be pretty much the same as last year. What we've seen is that the public has continued to conserve this year like they have last year. So the conservation efforts that have taken place in prior years have sustained themselves, and in fact, we're seeing a slight decrease in the volume of water sold, but it does show that the public is maintaining the same level of diligence that they have in the past. The sources of water was talked a little bit earlier by Mr. Kavunas, is in fact 60% of our water source we're projecting this year coming from the Metropolitan Water District, 35% from the local groundwater sources that we have, and the recycled is at 5%. This is an area that we definitely would like to see increase, and I think that our goal is, as Mr. Kavunas said, is to maximize our local groundwater consumption and minimize the Metropolitan Water District. So that's something that we've been working very hard to do. This is a 10-year depiction of the different sources of our water supply to give you a perspective. The red at the bottom represents our groundwater, and you can see that it's relatively consistent. Our blue is what we're purchasing from Metropolitan Water District, and our green is our recycled water program. And as you can see that the water supply has continued to go down, and it's something that we hope that we can maintain the conservation that has taken place. Next, we'll go in and talk a little bit about our fiscal year operations and maintenance budgets for the 11-12 period. For the fiscal year 11-12, what we've come up with is, for the electric utility, pretty much a balanced budget where we anticipate a $300,000 net income after general fund transfer. This represents a margin of 0.1%. So we're pretty much at a break even in the way that the budget has been constructed. The general fund transfer this year is going to go up by $2 million from 19.1 to 21.1. We wanted to provide you with some trending information so you can see how the utility is operated from 2010 budget to actual and our 2011 budget and our forecast. You can see that there's pretty much the same consistency between the different periods. What we did is we tasked our different work groups to maintain a budget that would come in balanced so that we would not have to have any large rate increase required for our customers. We felt that it would be important to take a look at our forecasted revenue because it's really consists of several moving parts, and to just look at revenue as a whole without looking at the various components really doesn't give you a full picture. So I'd like to start off with talking about our retail revenue. And our retail revenue, in fact, we anticipate a budget variance of $5.7 million. And that retail variance is a result of the fact that we've had less retail sales than we had forecasted. And we anticipate, or we believe it's due to two factors. One is the weather. We had milder weather conditions, and two, the economic conditions for Glendale as well as other parts of the nation have been less than stellar, and as a result, people are being more conservation-minded, and as a result, we've had less revenue. The second component is the non-operating revenue, and our non-operating revenue is actually less by $1.4 million. And this is, again, due to economic conditions and also lower interest income. This category relates to the reserves that Glendale Water and Power has and the interest rate that we earn on our reserves. The City of Glendale has an investment portfolio of about $450 million that's managed by the City Treasurer. We've continued to see low interest rates in the city's portfolio, and the rates were lower than that were actually projected. And as a result, we've had less interest income than we thought we would be receiving. The next area is our adjustable revenue is actually substantially less, and that relates to basically two main reasons. We actually, as many of you recall, we've had two rate decreases on our adjustable revenue, and that has actually impacted us to the tune of $23.8 million. And then the second is our decrease in the actual volume of sales. Now, the reason the $23.8 million rate decrease took effect is the fact that we had accumulated through our reserve account excess cash that had to be given back to the ratepayers. That was given back to the ratepayers through the rate decrease that we put together. So we're trying to make sure that our reserves from GWP's standpoint are in line with the city's policy. As a result, we were able to provide a decrease in line to our different customers. This was a substantial benefit to our customers and is something that many utilities have been unable to do this year. Next, we'll go into our water utility. For our water utility this year, we have forecasted, as I mentioned before, roughly a $5.1 million net income. Going into our next year budget, we don't anticipate it to be as robust. We do anticipate sales to go up slightly because we're having the benefit of a full year of the rate adjustment that has occurred, the 3.8% rate increase. We do anticipate that there is going to be a small level of sales increase. And then in addition, along with that, we anticipate with the sales increase there's going to be additional expenses that are occurring. The water production expenses are going up to a large part due to the fact that Metropolitan Water District rates are increasing. I wanted to share with you the water expenses for the year 2012 to give you a perspective on it. The production expenses are going to be roughly $23.5 million or 54% of our total operation. Again, the production expenses are the Metropolitan Water District costs as well as our groundwater operations. And our transmission and distribution costs, which is another large portion, 18%, is going to be up slightly as a result of some additional overhead allocations that have been burdened within the water fund itself. Our customer service costs are also going up slightly as a result of internal allocations that are going up this year. As you are well aware, the water rate the water rate study that was done by Wildan Associates took a look at the fact that there's going to be a need to further define how we allocate the expenses within GWP between the electric and water departments. The study that they put together identified that the traditional way of doing a 75-25 split on the expenses required some refinement. That 75-25 split was something that was developed many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago or more, and has been used on an ongoing basis. What Wildan did is they went in and they further refined that by developing a model that takes a look at different factors that would help refine to best put the costs in a proportional manner. As a result, there's about $2 million of additional expenses that are being charged to the water utility that have in past have been in the electric utility. But in total, those expenses are the same. So that's one of the reasons why the expenses have gone up in the water utility this year. The other item that has come up as a result of the city's evaluation of the Gladys Street settlement is that GWP water section is going to be burdened with approximately $5 million worth of additional expenses that have been determined to be attributable to the water utility. These expenses are going to be done on a prorated basis over a 5-year period at about $1 million per year for the next 5 years. So this is an additional expense that we wanted to highlight so that you're aware of this additional requirement. The third major fund that the city has, besides the electric and the water fund operation, is our public benefits fund. And the public benefits fund is based upon state law that requires that 2.85% of our electric revenues are to go to PBC programs. This is a state requirement, and with that, those funds are set aside to handle various programs that benefit the community. These programs are designed to help the underprivileged. They're also designed to provide energy efficiency. And this year, we're projecting in our budget $6.3 million of revenues, and this is in line based upon our projected sales, retail sales. And then our expenses, we've actually budgeted more expense because we have a buildup of reserves that we want to be able to do the necessary programming. So this year we've identified $7.4 million worth of program requirements, and at the end of the year we will still be above our $1 million reserve requirement for this fund. The public benefit programs have definitely been a big impact on the community. These numbers here represent, on a year-by-year basis, the amount of energy efficiency savings that have been realized by the city. Our goal is to have a target of 1% reduction in energy demand as a result of our energy efficiency programs that have been put into place. Last year, we actually eclipsed that number substantially by going about 1.45% above the goal. So this year, our target's 1%. We anticipate that we're going to either meet or beat that target number. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the capital projects, our CIP program for the upcoming year. Our CIP program is based in 4 areas: our electric services area, our power management area, our water services area, and our utility operations center. Our projected capital spending this year in 2010-11 is at $72.1 million. Our budget for 2010-11 was $77.8 million, so we're going to be slightly under what we anticipated we would be spending. Our preliminary budget right now for the 11-12 period is $71.4 million. What we'll do is we'll talk about each of those 4 areas to give you a flavor of the types of projects that we have budgeted. The first area is power management. In our power management area, it's not a very large area. In 2010-11, we project that our budget's going to be $5.8 million. We had actually budgeted $7.7 million. We deferred some items, and for our 2011-12 budget, it's going to be $6.8 million. The largest area is our steam capital improvements. That's at the Grayson Power Plant. We have a major capital improvement program that's been designed, and that starting in 11-12, you see a first ramp-up of $4.7 million. We had a slight malfunction, I'm sorry. The next area that we're going to talk about is our electric services capital. For electric services capital, our budget for 2010-11 was $40.3 million. At this point, we anticipate reaching that same $40.3 million level. Not all the costs are in the same categories. Some projects are under what we anticipated, some are over. Many of these projects span several years, so it's what I call a timing difference, and we have not had anything where we had any major overruns that occur in any particular category. For 2011-12, our capital requirement in electrical services has actually decreased from 40.3 to 36.2. There are 2 areas that we're focusing on: the distribution system improvement area, which is to help further automate our distribution system, and then the further working on our AMI program to help bring that closer into our completion. So those are the 2 major categories where we'll be spending money and our efforts in the upcoming year. Next is our water services capital area. In the 2010-11 budget, we had $24.1 million budgeted. We anticipate that we will be at the $24.1 million level again, in line with the overall budget. Again, there are certain areas that are over and certain areas that are under, but overall, the program for our CIP and the water services area is on budget. Our preliminary allocation is very similar to our projected 10-11 at $23.5 million. The two major areas are water source improvements, and the other is in our AMI project. And those are the two areas where the principal focus will be in this upcoming year. Our fourth area where we have capital projects is our Utility Operations Center, which is located at the Grayson Power Plant. The capital for our 2010-11 budget was $5.7 million. We actually are projected to be at 1.9. A number of items were deferred as a result of the fact that the city took a direction where we wanted to scale back and defer items, and as a result, we have done that. Preliminarily, we brought some of these items back, and we'll be working on them again this year, but not quite to the same level as what we had budgeted in 10-11. Our budget will be roughly about $800,000 less. The principal area that we're working on is the site common area improvements. When we say common area, we're talking about the joint facility, which has both water and electric operations housed at the Utility Operations Center. So therefore, we call it site common area improvements. And now I'd like to turn it over to Glenn for the key capital projects.
Hey, I'd like to highlight a couple of the projects that we have just recently completed to give you a sense of where the capital dollars are going. And before I do that, I just want to mention that as you look at our capital expenditure, keep in mind that a significant piece of that is our AMI or Smart Grid project. So from last year, this year, and next year, you see kind of a bulge in that capital budget. As you go out farther, that's where we've pushed out projects, and it reduces dramatically. So at this point, I'd like to ask Peter Kavonis to come up and take a minute talking about this project.
Good evening again, members of the Commission, Mr. Steiger. The Central Avenue Cleaning and Lining Project is a project we completed in the 10-11 fiscal year. This project had a budget of about $4.1 million. We came in pretty close, just under the budget, and the schedule was also pretty close. The project it's called Central Avenue. We tend to call our projects by the name of one street that they are centered on, but they actually cover a whole a much bigger part of the city than just Central Avenue. In this particular case, we do have an exhibit that I can show you, a little bit broader map of what our project covered. Just one second. Here we go. Thank you, George. Let me borrow that pointer.
You want the industrial strength?
The industrial strength. Barely legal pointer. Okay. Okay. Okay, so again, you're familiar, of course, with this portion of the city of Glendale. Here's the 134 freeway and the 5. You'll see a number of heavy dashed black lines running throughout a number of city streets, pretty much covering from the main part of the city, running north-south to east-west, and little bits and pieces all over. So the point of showing you this is to get you to appreciate that in total the project was about 40,000 feet of pipe that was cleaned and relined. We can go back to the other slide, George. And about 1,000 feet of pipe that was installed that was new. The project touched many different parts of the city, and that's what makes this a very complicated project, is we have to make sure that we find the residents that are going to be affected, make sure that they're sidelined to begin with so that they're not impacted, and then we start with pipes that look like what you see in the middle, which over a year have built up and pretty heavy-duty sediments that have reduced the size of the pipe. And we go in, we clean all that out, and line it with a nice clean coating of cement, and end up with a pipe that looks like the picture on the right. The results of the project are increased flow capacity, increased pressure, much better water quality control, and it's also a reduction in leakage through the old pipes. So a great benefit, and you can see a project like that, 40,000 feet, will touch many different parts of the city in the course of doing that.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Henry Abrari to give an overview of a very successful project that we had on the electric side of our business, the Glorieta substation.
Good evening. Henry Abrari, Principal Electrical Engineer. What I'd like to give you is an overview of our Glorieta substation. This station was our first brand new station since 1976, when our Columbus sub was built to feed Galleria. And there are a few significant details about this project. Number one, the reason we looked into building this station was the fact that we realized that in the event of a catastrophic event, northern Glendale is actually kind of islanded. So what we wanted to do was to provide another source of power for the northern part of Glendale. And the best option that we saw, since we didn't have use of the New York substation anymore, we decided to upgrade the Glorieta substation. Now, as you can see on the left, we had it's pretty ugly structure. It's an air-insulated substation. It was actually rated at 34 kV for the transmission line and the high voltage, and on the low side it was rated at 4 kV. And what we were able to do is actually build a GIS substation, which is gas-insulated substation that's sulfur hexafluoride, which what it does is that it pretty much allows us to fit 4 times the size of what we had on there in the same footprint. And at the same time, what that did for us was we were able to actually convert that whole area, whole residential area, Verdugo Woodlands, and parts of northern Glendale to 12 kV, which actually improves our reliability, and it also provides better voltage fluctuations for that area. And as I said, it actually fits about 4 times the capacity into that footprint. The project started in January of 2010, and it was just completed this past month. As I'm speaking, we are going through the commissioning and energization. And again, I talked about reliability and capacity, but I think one of the most important items about this station is the fact that it actually enables us to implement our DA project, our distribution automation project, which gives us full control of the substation in our Howard. And not only that, we get to have, we are using some of the circuits as our pilot program for our DA project, where we are installing 14 reclosers in that area. It's going to help us implement our outage management system. It will help us have basically a self-healing distribution system, improved reliability, and all in all, it's a really nice project. Not only we were able to do all the technical stuff that we engineers like to talk about, but at the same time, we tried to have a building that's very compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and actually it looks a lot better than what we had in there before.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
And as Henry mentioned, as a lead into our to the next slide, and I'm going to just briefly go through this because you've had an update on our smart grid project, and we do this every month. But I think it's important to understand that we're now building our system in a compatible way to integrate with our smart grid. And Glorieta substation is a prime example of that, in that has been built specifically with smart grid technology will allow it to integrate distribution automation into our system. Just a quick overview, just as a reminder, we, with our stimulus funding and now with the additional $1 million from CEC, have been able to, in fact, have had to accelerate this project into a 3-year project. We are completely on schedule currently. You've seen where we were with budget. And it has allowed us to integrate additional technology that we didn't originally expect to do in this time frame, that technology being the distribution automation piece, the energy storage piece, which we're doing through Ice Bear, and the demand response portion. Along with that, we've been able to do some very unique things with our in-home display, where we'll be probably the only utility in the country using an in-home display that is actually a digital frame that integrates with the internet and also with the meter directly. Very unique situation, and again, it's one of those areas that we're pioneering. So that's a quick overview of Smart Grid. You're aware of it, and I just wanted to make sure that we understood this is our largest single project at over $70 million, and that does have an impact on our budget. We've committed to it. It has forced us to do some other things to make sure we can commit to the timing of this, but it will position us extremely well for the future. So it's a good investment. I think more importantly to everything we've said is where do we stand from a competitive and comparative standpoint. And something I wanted to show that our sister city Burbank did about a month ago, did some analysis to show where various utilities in the state stand. Now, this particular, I need our industrial strength point. The reason Burbank is blue is because it was created by Burbank, but the important thing is to show that back in 1999, the weighted average residential revenue per kilowatt hour looked like this. And if you see, Glendale is just about at the top. For all intents and purposes, we're at the top. And for many years, we have suffered with that higher than average electric rate on the residential side. However, as we look now to where we are today, same group of utilities in comparison, Glendale has now dropped to the middle of these utilities in terms of weighted average residential revenue. We're very, very proud of the fact that we've worked hard to get here and show where we are in terms of the overall change in weighted average revenue since 1999. Glendale is at the very bottom. So we have increased far less than average. There's the national CPI right there. We are at the very bottom. We've worked hard, even though we started high, and we know we did that. We were high, and we've been higher than average, but we've worked hard to get it down to a reasonable level, and the way we did it was by minimizing the amount of increase compared to all of our neighbors throughout the state. To give you a sense of what that means in terms of real dollars, we obviously compare ourselves to our sister cities of Burbank and Pasadena. And what I'd like to point out here, even though we have more customers than either one of those neighbors, we have the least amount of revenue. Primarily because, as Bill mentioned, we are highly residential in nature, where our neighbors are less so. In fact, Burbank very much less so. Very much has a commercial industrial base that we do not have. However, with that being said, we still transfer on the electric side higher than our neighbors. Yet we're still able to do a pretty good job of getting our rates down to a reasonable level. That's what I wanted to in this slide. And again, just as a reminder, we go over this every year, but should anyone forget, there are many, many benefits to having a municipal utility as part of the city organization. Obviously, general fund support, we know that through our transfer, and as we compare ourselves to investor-owned utilities, investor-owns take their profit and share it with their shareholders. Our city council is our regulator, whereas the CPUC is the regulator for IOUs. And as you can see, there are many, many additional benefits to a municipal utility that in many cases we take for granted. Streetlight operations, traffic signal, electricity, public notification system, which is actually a GWP system, but has been used more by the city over the last year for many of the emergencies we've had. So we do all the billing for all of city services, and it's done through GWP. So many, many benefits. Now, again, from a comparative standpoint, what this chart shows is the highest percentage of our users in the city in terms, these are all residential users, and what this shows is that the highest frequency of users is 500 kilowatt hours per month or less. And if you combine these two categories right here, over 70% of all of our residential base uses 500 kilowatt hours or less. So looking at that, this is how we stack up with our neighboring utilities. We are currently, this is Glendale, this is where we stand in terms of a 500 kilowatt hour per month customer. We're at $67.86. The 6 utility average is $73. We are below the average. We've done a good job, as Bill mentioned earlier. We have used some of our reserves in our fuel adjustment charge, which we need to give back, and we've done that over the last year, and that's helped us reduce rates and keep them there, able to stay where we are in a stable situation. Give you a sense of what the rate actually looks like for this particular customer. This is the base rate. This pays for operations, maintenance, and capital expenditures. Right here. This is our fuel adjustment. Fuel adjustment pays for primarily natural gas and purchased power. And then finally, this piece up here is the public benefits charge, which we charge to all customers at a 3.6% rate, and that pays for our public benefits programs, and all utilities do that. On the water side, give you a sense of how we look on the water side, similarly. The 4-utility average, and what we do on water is we compare ourselves with our closest neighbors because those have the same water characteristics as we do. So that makes the most sense to do that. And as you can see, Crescenta Valley is up here, Burbank is at the low end. Glendale is in the middle, again, below average, and that's what we've committed to do through our strategic plan, and we continue to do that. So what does that leave us in terms of the future? There's still a lot of challenges for us. We've committed to reduce our electric rates 35% below Edison. We're about halfway through that strategic plan. Are we at 35%? No, we're not. We range anywhere from about 12% below Edison to about 21% below Edison, depending upon the rate classification. If you go back to where we started a couple of years ago, that was a much closer comparison. So we've made a good shot at this. We continue to work on it. Will we make 35%? We're going to hold that. We're not going to change that goal. That's our stretch goal. We're going to hope to get close to that. Increasing Grayson efficiency. Essentially what that means is what are we going to do with some of the older units at Grayson, and do we really need to put another unit down there? And that's still evaluating that. Power supply is always a challenge because of the volatility of the energy market. Currently, the oil market has shot through the roof. Generally, natural gas follows along. It has not so far. We've been fortunate, but that could happen at any time. On the water side, Peter gave a very good discussion of our potable sources, so I think that tells that story. The expansion of our recycled water system, as I mentioned earlier, is in the planning stage. It's planned. It's a matter of, do we have the funding? Sustainable conservation. We have had mandatory water restrictions for close to 2 years now. We're about ready to lift them. However, that does not relieve the necessity of having water efficiency and the use of less water have before. So there'll still be a conservation component to the water utility that will go on for the foreseeable future, probably forever. And then finally, the treatment of chromium-6. Again, we are pioneering that for the nation. We continue to do so. And the nation has now taken a more focused look at what that means, so there'll be a more focused look at Glendale to see how we can rise to that occasion. Then finally, common issues for the entire utility. Budgetary compliance, you heard a bit today about where we are. We've made extraordinary efforts to balance the budget for next year, have cut back our discretionary overtime. We've pretty much eliminated that. We are now on a hard hiring freeze at GWP, like the rest of the city. We've had a soft hiring freeze. We're now a very hard hiring freeze. Cut back outside contractors, and we've pushed out our capital budget. Regulatory compliance continues to expand. We are meeting those challenges, but they continue to require additional resources. Transition of our workforce to a smart grid-oriented workforce is a challenge for us. Now at the beginning stages of that, it's going to take some work. It's going to take a change in philosophy, a change in attitude, and in many cases a change in training and work skills. That's an ongoing challenge for the near term, actually for the long term. Talked about rate restructuring. We're doing it on the water side, and we'll be doing it on the electric side. Smart grid is a common issue. We don't believe it's a problem. We believe it's a challenge for us, and it positions us well. Asset management is something we have to do. We had to push that back a little bit, and we'd like to be able to bring that back because it's very important to the ongoing. And then finally, the ongoing economic and climate change uncertainty, and what that means to us as a utility. We've seen it in our budget issues, in our usage. Okay, last year, usage was down for two reasons. One, due to the economy, and two, because on the electric side, we had a relatively cool summer, so people didn't use as much energy. So that's a picture of GWP. It's a fairly significant explanation, but it incorporates both our budget and our issues. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you. Any questions?
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking you for an impressive and excellent presentation on the state of the utility and the many impressive accomplishments that the utility has made under the current strategic plan, despite the setbacks that have occurred. And I also sense powerful morale in at least the group that's present, and I hope that's can be shared also among the other employees and with the customer base as well. On slide number 7, I wanted to mention under water infrastructure 5.3, we've, I'll wait a little bit till you can get there. There we go, yes. Under 5 water infrastructure, you'll see 5.3, we've been delayed on that particular goal, which is a replacement and rehabilitation of 25 miles of pipe. And I wanted to ask, not necessarily expecting an answer at this time, if we know, if we can say what the, how many years it'll take to replace pipe versus the expected lifetime of the pipe. And, of course, ideally, I think we want to make sure that we replace the pipe within its expected lifetime or within its extended lifetime if we're engaging in cement lining. And perhaps when you're in the process of the goal reformulation, that will get some attention. On the following slide, in number 8, we, under 7, the workforce, 7.1, continually improve job satisfaction of our employees. Is that measured through a survey of the employees?
Some of it is, and some of it is just a general sense of how morale is and that type of thing.
Yeah, we've talked about this in a previous meeting, and I don't know exactly what that is due to, but I'm hoping there can be some at least identification of what it is and how it could be addressed. Is there some comment on what it is due to?
That's one of the things we're looking at right now in redesigning that particular part of the strategic plan. It's a very significant piece. So We know what has occurred over the last couple of years from an economic standpoint. We just had a shift, as you know, in representation of our labor force, going from the GCEA to the IBEW. We don't know what that means in terms of, but because of those kinds of things, there's been a bit of unrest in the ranks, so to speak. So maybe some of this will start to take care of itself, but we need to look at what we need from a management standpoint.
Okay. Okay. Also, in the following slide, number 9.1, improve communications with the customers, city council, and city departments. What specific actions were involved in that particular goal?
The issue there, the real issue, is not with customers. We've done, I think, an extraordinary job on the customer end with our outreach. It's really internal to city council.
Okay.
We have to get in front of city council more than we do. We've done some workshops. We haven't done the kinds of thing that I believe is necessary, and that falls back on us. So we have some work to do.
Well, I have to comment, my understanding is the statutory role of the commission, I think, is to advise council regarding the state of the utility, and perhaps, the commission can be of some service in that regard. Perhaps in thinking about this, you can bring some ideas up to our attention.
I will. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, it was extremely helpful to us to have the commission support us in the rate increase. As difficult as that was, that helped quite a bit. Appreciate that. So, yes, that's the kind of thing we need to talk about.
We don't really have a formal process of communicating with council in the commission here, and maybe that's something that might be helpful, possibly. I don't know exactly what could be set up, but I'll toss that idea out for consideration, both by yourselves and maybe some of the people in the council are listening. Council, were you going to say something?
Well, one opportunity would be, if we present matters to you as an action item for you to pass a formal motion approving or recommending that council approve a given measure or that it take a formal action, and that would certainly be an endorsement by the commission.
Okay.
That's one option. There may be others, though.
On slide number 16, you have pointed out the uptick in the wholesale that had occurred, or is in the projected fiscal year 2010-11. Could you comment more on why that has happened?
You asked that question again.
Yeah, the increase in wholesale production.
Yeah.
Why has that occurred?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked, because we should have talked more about that. We've actually expanded our trading group. We've enhanced it with the whole idea of being more efficient on the retail side and also at the same time taking advantage of wholesale opportunities. And we've started to do that in a much more calculated way. So what you're seeing here is the beginning of that uptick in what we're doing, and we expect over the next couple of years to increase that even more.
I'm glad to hear that. I think there may be some opportunity here for us to market our production services in that regard. When we say wholesale, are we referring only to Grayson, or are there other sources that we have?
It's Grayson. It's also, there are times when we buy energy and we may not use it all.
Yeah.
For various reasons.
Okay.
We sell that. Natural gas, same issue. So I'll say it's primarily Grayson, but by no means is it all Grayson. No.
And then when it comes to green power credits, I know we've talked about selling some of those, for example, to Pasadena. Is that considered wholesale? Is that?
That's a good question. We've had that debate in-house. My own opinion is that it's considered wholesale, yes.
But it's not reflected then in this number.
Actually, the slide represents sales to other parties other than our retail customers, so it does include what we would traditionally call wholesale and retail to other utilities. So anybody outside of our server's territory is the amount that's reflected in red there.
Okay. I have other questions. It was a very long presentation, but I'd like to defer to some of my...
I'd like to jump in because it relates to your last question regarding the wholesale power, because in the previous slide, in slide 15, you mentioned that the renewable existing is about 19.7%. But as I understand it, that reflects everything that you listed, but the sale to Pasadena, shouldn't that be taken out?
It is. It is
Is
out.
already? So
Yeah.
biomass at 3.7% is already accounted for the Pasadena sale?
The actual renewable percentage for this year, if you include all of the landfill gas, is about 24%. So part of that is taken out to account for the sale to Pasadena.
Okay. And then it was mentioned that 33% of renewable by 2020. Doesn't that exclude large hydros?
It does.
So if you take large hydro out, then we actually might be in a bind if we need to compete for renewable energy in the future.
If you take hydro out, but you put back in the options that we have with Los Angeles off to the left there, that more than offsets, and that's one of the reasons we did that. That more than offsets the hydro, the Hoover, and that still keeps us roughly 23-24% today, which means we have to make up about 10 percentage points between now and 2020. We were already in development stage of a solar project currently that would get us pretty close to that 33%. That will take a few years to develop, but we have quite a few options. And the good news is, because we're at roughly 24%, we're in better position to be able to not have to rush in to something right now. Even when we do lose the hydro in 2017, I believe, is when we lose.
Okay. And then I guess it's somewhat related on the wholesale side. I understand from the budget forecast, the agenda forecast, that there's going to be some talks about the metrics on how, if we're making money on trading in the wholesale
Yes.
market. So that's going to be part of the agenda for next month.
We'll be coming back to you with that.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
While we're on this slide, I do have a question on the solar incentives. I know several weeks ago we went to council with a proposal. Can you update us on that?
Sure. Part of the public benefits program, and it's known as SB1, is a requirement to spend for us about $15 million over the next 10 years in solar incentives. Over the last year and a half, 2 years, the saturation of solar has increased dramatically here in Glendale for a number of reasons. One of them is the cost of solar has come down. And our incentive stayed at a very high rate, at roughly $4 per kilowatt, a little under that, which is high. In fact, it was one of the highest of any utility around. We actually ran out of funding for that program last year because it was so popular. So what we have just done is gone back to City Council, got their approval to reduce that incentive down to about $2 per kilowatt of installed solar for residential, with a slightly different formula for commercial. And what that will do is that allows us to double the size of the program and get far more people involved, and yet the price, having come down, still offers a very attractive payback. So we have reduced our incentive, but at least we've been able to open it back up to people that want to use it.
I believe that's $2 per watt.
About $2 per kilowatt, yes.
Thanks. Any other questions? I do have a couple more.
I do too, but why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Going back to slide 8, on the workforce portion, I understand quite a few of these goals have been delayed due to the economic situation, and I understand that. With 7.4 and 7.5, that's on OSHA incident rate.
Yes.
And then also the zero preventable vehicle accidents. So these are safety, and so I was just wondering, what are we doing about that? What is the cause of that?
Well, interestingly, our OSHA incident rate is just above 2, but because it's not at 2, we're in the red. So we're looking to see what else we can do. We've actually changed the organization, our safety organization, to reflect a more focused look at safety in each specific part of GWP. That's one thing. The preventable vehicles, and again, we have a zero preventable, and it's hard to be at zero, but we're trying. So as long as we have any more than zero, we're going to be out of compliance. That we've taken a very aggressive training, back to driving school, that kind of thing, hoping for the best, but a lot of it is inattention. It's not necessarily driving skills, it's inattention, it's just complacency, that type of thing, so we're working on that.
I mean, I don't advocate discipline or anything like that, or disciplinary actions, but what are we doing?
Well, we absolutely have a disciplinary program for, particularly for preventable vehicle accidents.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thanks. You have any? Okay.
That was one of them. Thank you for taking care of it. You mentioned on slide 27, I believe is when you brought it up, Mr. Fox, about the prorated amount of $1 million per year, I think, for 5 years. What was that comment about? I missed the exact context of it. Is that having to do with the chargeback from the city? Or did I not hear that correctly?
There was a approximately $10 million settlement on the Gladys Street.
Oh, that has to do with the Gladys Street. Okay.
That's correct, yes. WP was identified as being 50% responsible. I believe is it Public Works, Christine?
Public Works was allocated 50%, and Glendale Water and Power was allocated 50%.
And this was a suit against the city?
This was a lawsuit against the city relating to some landslide issues that occurred, some mudslide issues in 2005.
So we've got a 5-year payout of that?
Yeah, the city made a determination, instead of trying to charge the water utility in 1 year, that they would stretch it out over a 5-year period.
Okay. The other question I had to do with slide 32. Talked about steam unit capital improvements. That's to do with Grayson, I assume, right?
Yes.
Can you elaborate what the nature of those improvements are?
It's a turbine rebuild, not on one of the older units, because doing now with the older units are just keeping them minimally maintained until we decide what to do with them. But on newer units, there is a rebuild required due to starts and hours operated.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify, make sure we're not spending more money on the old ones.
No.
And will we at some point hear about, you mentioned, Mr. Steiger, about evaluating Grayson and current state and future options. Is that something, as a commission, we'll hear something about in the future?
You will absolutely hear that. That's one of those issues that has been a moving target for us, because there's been so many different options that when we think we're at a point where we want to make a decision, another option comes up, so we push it back a little bit. But yes, absolutely it will.
Okay. Do you have a time frame approximately when we might hear?
It should be, I say this all the time, so I have to be careful, but it should be within the next 3 months.
The only other thing I had to say was a comment. I was at the Glorieta substation opening, and I really wanted to congratulate GWP for a fabulous project. And it really shows how we as a city are on the cutting edge of smart grid and making the investments we need to maintain reliability. So I really wanted to congratulate you on that project and keeping it on budget.
Thank you.
I do have one other question. Going back to slide 6. .3 says institute a 2.5% PBC charge to fund water conservation measures. That one, if you, after reading that, if you go to slide 28, you cover public benefits financial trend there. How are the two of those connected?
They're not.
They're not. Okay.
The public benefits, this is primarily electric. It is a function of that
I see.
3.6% public benefits. The other one is related to water, and it's something we wanted to try to here in Glendale, but the state has now taken that issue over, so we backed off. But on the water side, it's more difficult to pay for efficiency because of Prop 218 limitations, and that's why you need something like a public benefits charge to do it.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
I wanted to ask you about slide number 25. You indicate the rate decrease here of $23.8 million. Can you think of any other utilities that have had a rate decrease?
No.
Part of the goal of a strategic plan is to translate the mission statement into action, and your mission statement is to be the trusted community utility, and I can't think of a more powerful way of translating that into reality than a rate decrease, particularly during a time of economic downturn. And I'd like to, I know we've spoken about this before, but I think that you deserve congratulations on this, and it needs to be highlighted to the community. I think also in terms of your, and I just lost my place here, so bear with me, but your other slides, I think there were slides 42 through 44, in which you showed that Glendale had a more of a decrease, I think, in terms of its revenue per kilowatt hour than any other of quite a few utilities here also ties into that, and I'd like to congratulate you on that. And that's, I think that was my final comment.
Madam Chair? Yeah, I have a few more, Ms. Steiger. Sorry, I just thought of it when you mentioned some of the other issues about costs, and Mr. Amin mentioned about the settlement. The issue of the water fund transfer, I guess next fiscal year we'll be doing away with the fund transfer, but we'll be making it up with the reallocation of electric and water issue, whereby $2 million will still be transferred over to the water utility. And then, of course, the settlement will add a few dollars there. But it sounds like from 2 months ago, I recall the public speaker saying something about reallocating costs to make sure that it's appropriate. You charge the utility based on its costs, but whereby the utility should charge for its services. So it's only fair that that happens. Is that accounted for in these revenue projections and expenses?
Yes.
And how is that portrayed? I mean, are we charging the city for certain water costs that is expected and it's included in the revenue side now?
There's really one primary allocation change that's occurred to create most of the transfer from water to electric. And what that is, as Bill mentioned earlier, we had always arbitrarily split the internal allocation of GWP 75% water, or electric, and 25% water. What that means is when you pay for common services like customer services, 75% of that is allocated to electric and so on. When we reanalyzed that and took a hard look at what the numbers truly are today, because we haven't done that, and I can't remember when the last time we did it, if ever. The real numbers looked a whole lot different. The real numbers look like about 67% electric and about 33% water. And what that does is that creates a higher payment from water for these services, less from electric, but then electric pays more through the transfer of electric to make up for some of that. So essentially what's occurred is that allocation is about $2 million, and so the way that's accounted for is the electric transfer is being increased by $2 million.
And then that's the to make up for the transfer loss, but what about the cost that we're trying to build, that the city's trying to build GWP Waterside, and whereby we should be building them for actual costs?
Well, there's actually, as it turned out, there's very little that the city is going to be able to bill us for. There's a little bit of security costs, but it's insignificant compared to the entire transfer dollars. So that really isn't the issue. There's the other $1 million that for the next 5 years that we pay on the Gladys Street as Bill mentioned. So what's occurred is, while it would appear that the water side is the recipient of a windfall of $4.2 million, the reality is not much at all. Okay, very little. It's not quite break even, but it's pretty close.
Okay, so you might hear some comment about water. Let's move to the electric side, because it sounds like next fiscal year the transfer from electric fund will increase as well. As I understand it, we had I guess you mentioned and presented to the commission that there was an agreement between staff and the city council that there'll be a fixed transfer, but it sounds like it's going to go up next year. Can you expand on that?
It's going up because the city is losing $4.2 million out of its general fund. And so, yeah, part of that will be made up through electric. But as I mentioned, a good deal of that is the reallocation internally in GWP from water to electric.
Do you see that being sustained into the following year as well?
Yes, I do.
So you wouldn't go back down to the 19 million?
Well, I'd like to maybe say it may not go down substantially, but each year we're going to be taking a look at the model that was developed by Wildan and make sure that the assumptions that went into that model are still appropriate, because there are multi-factors that are involved in that, and each one needs to be examined. Even as we sit here today, the report that was generated by Wildan, we're looking at those assumptions again moving forward before we finalize our budget. There, in fact, are opportunities to re-examine to make sure that the percentages and the allocations that have been developed are appropriate. So what we have now, as we've couched this as preliminary, there could be some changes that occur. And so I don't want to say that it's final, but the important thing is each year that it needs to be looked at to make sure that the assumptions that are used are appropriate.
And that's fine. But can you go to slide 46? It shows here that you have a good representation of what's happening between a municipality versus an investor-owned utility. But I would tend to say that from, let's see, item 8 to 13, it's almost, I'm not sure how much the city is paying GWP for those services, but it sounds like those could be considered a fund transfer, because if they're not paying the city, that is part of what the general fund is supporting the city. So then the item number 2, where the profit to the investor-owned utility could actually be lower than if you account for items 8 through 13 into item 1. That could be more significant. Do you know if item 8 through 13 is being paid or cost share somehow by the city?
The answer is no.
No, so those are like free services to the city because we're a municipal utility.
Well, it's part of it's part of us being a municipal utility. Some of those services are fairly typical with municipal utilities. Not all, but some are.
But if, for example, if we were to assume a cost associated for item 8 through 13 and lump that into item 1, what would be the total cost that we'd be transferring?
If we've calculated that. Not calculated.
Would it be significant in your opinion?
Relatively. It's depends on how you want to define significant, but it's...
well, just, I mean, in order to match it, would be half, another 10 million? It could be 5 million?
No, it wouldn't be anywhere near that.
It would be $4 million?
It would be less than water transfer was.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know for next future meeting if you just give us an idea, and the public an idea of how much that's costing, because if we were to reallocate what the fund transfer definition means, we can say that, hey, we're actually transferring a lot more than what's on the books. Okay?
I'd like to say that, those items that you've highlighted those are policy decisions that have been made by the city, as well as city council has ratified them. I do think it's worth taking a look at that. We at GWP feel that it's important that we provide the service to the community, whether the city pays for it or whether GWP pays for it. These are items that are needed.
I agree, and I support that completely. It's just a matter of transparency where we understand the actual cost of that, and that it's not, I mean, some people might not see that if we actually show there's an actual cost, that if there's a reallocation or somehow in the future, that the city council understand that the general fund dollar is not just that dollar. It could be the other services that we're providing at currently no cost. So that if they factor it in, they might see that that is significant, where they might have to reconsider any potential rate increases. That's just a point I want to make so that we can understand that those are costs that should be visible to everybody.
The reason we bring them forward to you is so that you're aware of it as well as the public's aware of that these are the dynamics that we're working with.
Yeah, and that's something that was mentioned in the beginning, that if this commission has the capacity to make recommendations to the City Council, then if we see those costs, we can say that instead of $21 million being transferred, it's actually $25 million, and that we would recommend maybe keeping it let's say back to $15 million, considering the other $5 million from these other free services. So something like that can be considered.
I think you bring up a very good point, and it's definitely something that would be a policy decision that would be looked at by not only yourselves, but City Council.
Thank you.
I wanted to say something further about this point. And the whole issue, to me, has to do with transparency, public transparency, particularly on this issue, because I think this issue has instigated a lot of thought, a lot of accusations, and has the potential to appear and be perceived as funny business in terms of money being moved around like a shell game. And because we are talking about significant amounts, to the degree that there can be transparency in the process. So, for example, if GWP has done a budgetary evaluation, whether it be the value of services provided to the city or vice versa, and how that all nets out, I think having a more detailed accounting of that presented as part of the budgetary presentation would help create more transparency, which will only, I think, help in building understanding with the public about, all the dynamics that go into the transfer issue. And I think lifting that sort of cloud of mystery is always beneficial for all parties, whether it be this commission, the GWP, the City Council, and just for general public knowledge.
Okay. Any other comments? Before we move forward, I want to thank you again for this very informative presentation. And I feel you and your staff are doing a great job. Congratulations on all of the progress and looking at all of the major projects that are going on. I think everything's going really great. So thank you. Now we have two public speakers. First, Mr. Harry Zabels, please.
Thank you, Commission. I'm a resident of Glendale. I want to start with what Mr. Yao had to say. I think it's very, very significant here. For example, street lighting is really for traffic, which is a general fund obligation. It's being provided free, as I understand it, by the electrical side of GWP. So that is really supporting the general ratepayers, supporting general fund functions. And I think for transparency, that should be made very clear. And I would pick up the terminology of Mr. Armenian with respect to shell games, because there is an appearance of this. The $4 million transfer lost because it's violent of 218 is being somehow readjusted so it still can go to the general fund, whether it's reallocating internal expenses between the water and electric, so the electric has more money available and it transfers $2 million without any effect on its budget because it puts that $2 million on water, or other kinds of items. For example, you brought up the Gladys liability settlement that is going to be paid by GWP. Now, that comes right out of the Wyndham report. And what happened there, you had a landslide on Gladys Street, and the city was sued. The court made a determination that the city was liable, and there were two theories for liability. Having made that determination, the city decided to settle with regard to the amount to be paid. Now, the Wyndham report said, gee, you know, there was a fund where all departments contributed an insurance premium to cover liability. But if you go back 10 years and look at all those contributions made by GWP, it doesn't add up to their share of the liability for the settlement, $5 million. So we're going to go back and do that. Now, that just doesn't make sense to me. If I pay for 10 years fire insurance, and then I have a total loss on my house, and let's say I paid $10,000 over 10 years, and they come back and they say, hey, the loss is $100,000, you got to pay us $90 million more. That's not insurance. I think you need to inquire as to what the liability arrangements were for various departments when that loss took place. Secondly, I've read the opinion, and I don't understand how the city gets, or the Wyndham people get 50-50 liability on that loss. Plaintiffs sued on two theories. The first theory is the way it was engineered, it caused the water to overtop the curb and cause the landslide. The second, and that they were liable for that. The second theory of the plaintiffs was, if that's not the case, if the city wasn't liable for the overtopping of the water causing the landslide, well, the landslide caused the water connection to the house to break, which caused additional water, and they were slow in shutting off that water. So the city, on that theory, would be liable not for the entire damage, but to the aggravated damage because of the failure to shut off that line in time, or because of the break in that line. And the court decided that they didn't have to determine what was the liability on the second theory because they decided on the first theory. They decided on the basis that the way it was engineered, it overtopped the curb and it caused a landslide. Even if they decided on the second theory, I talked to plaintiffs in that lawsuit, and they said the reason they couldn't shut the line down was because the city had paved over the shutoff valves. So they had to find shutoff valves. Now, how you get 50% liability on the entire settlement, you've got to explain to me this whole notion about this liability fund and the insurance premium you're paying and why you can go back and recalculate it. And then you got to show me how, given the opinion saying that they don't have to make a determination on the second theory that has to do with the break of the water line, we get 50-50 liability and back charge the waterworks for that. Now, you know, this Wyndham report was done originally because I brought up the issue of the violation of Proposition 218 in terms of transferring the funds, water fee funds to the general fund. And one section prepared by the city attorney's side agreed that that was the case. The other side really was a way, how can we move money around to make up for the $4 million that we're losing? And it just seems to me transparent. You've got to make a case as to why the waterworks is going to be liable for half of that settlement. The opinion doesn't support that. And then you got to ask, why is that the case? If in fact they had a liability fund where each department paid a certain amount to cover liability, and then suddenly because the loss is greater than how much they paid, you're going to go back and recalculate. That's like saying, hey, you paid your fire insurance premiums, and you know the loss is 10 times your fire insurance premium, so we're going to charge you for that and other 90%. It just doesn't make sense. And I'd like to say one more thing, because I don't understand the model completely. I've got to dope it out where you're reallocating 32% to the water side and 68 versus 75-25. One of the steps of that...
We need you to wrap it up, please.
Okay, one of the steps in that has to do with the fact that we have a mutual billing department. And the cost of that billing department, including, for example, postage, traditionally was on a 25-75 split. And the Wyndham report said we should make it 50-50. But as you've seen right here on these slides, we have far more electrical customers than water customers. We have far more electrical meters than water meters. It's basically on a ratio of 1 to 3. And that's understandable. You got a 100-unit apartment, guess what? You got 101 electric meters, one for each apartment unit and one for the owner. How many...
Thank you, Mr. Zabos. Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano, please.
Commission President Chan, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, and city staff. My name is Herbert Molano. Out of the city's commissions, there are two that stand out, in my opinion, with regard to the relevancy and influence with regard to the city's governance. One is the Civil Service Commission, and they're pretty independent and they have real power. They cannot be dismissed so easily. The other commission that has relevancy is this one, yours, because so much of the budget, of the overall city's budget, is water and power. The question to me is whether your positions are being made relevant enough and whether you have sufficient influence to be able to truly direct or make the type of recommendations that changes the direction in which the city handles its GWP policies. And I'm concerned about that because in the past hour or hour and a half, we had a fairly extensive budgetary discussion, all lumped together. In my opinion, they could have been broken up into various different sections to allow the public to have an appropriate amount of time for each one of those sections. As it is right now, I got a 5-minute reply or 3-minute reply left on basically what was practically an hour and a half presentation on overall issues of the city budget, and there are many to discuss. And there are many that are very relevant. One of the relevant things that I continue to bring up is the issue of the vision statement with regard to being cost competitive. Slide 4. Well, what does it mean to be cost competitive and what measures are aligned or cascade to that concept? If you just simply put words on a vision statement and don't measure it, it's meaningless. You have to become accountable to it. So if you're cost competitive with regard to your internal perspective, meaning your labor cost, your benefits, your pensions. But I don't see here, as I see in these charts, as good as they are, the type of trend analysis that Mr. Kavunas gave us earlier. I love that. You could see year to year for the past 10 years what the trends are. But we don't get to see here the cost with regard to labor on a trend line, or benefits on a trend line, or pensions on a trend line. We don't see it. We don't see the trends that are really impacting the overall cost and the production cost of both water and electricity. What I would love to see, to take a page out of Mr. Kavunas' presentation, is to see, for example, a production cost per acre feet laid out year to year, so that at least we have the same type of measure. And how about a production cost per, let's say, megawatt hour? And see what happens, or see what portion of it is labor and what portion of it is pension. Because in 2005, we had a change in the pension system that increased the pensions by about 40%. That has an impact on everything. And that's embedded in all the overall costs that you're viewing, but you don't get to see that, and the public doesn't get to see that, and we don't see how those trends are impacting it. Look, there are many issues that were brought up, and I just want to highlight a few that are of concern to me. There's the issue of job satisfaction. Part of the reason of job satisfaction declining is because it's an issue of pay increase. And of course, all the employees get to see what takes place at City Council. When you have the police department getting year-over-year increase of 11%, right, and everybody else has to tighten their belts, there's an inequity that takes place. You cannot look at the Glendale Water and Power isolated from the rest of the issues, and when they see that, they say, wait a second, why do we have to hold back on our pay increases while these other departments do? It's relevant. And to some extent, you wonder what portion of that job satisfaction has to do with the issue of pay increases during this recessionary period. Look, we have issues concerning the trading effectiveness that I'd like to see. We didn't get to see much of that. But I do have some issues with regard to the way the presentation was made with regard to the cost to the, of the rates for the ratepayers. I have here with me the CAFR. And I have here on page 161, it shows what the rates were. In 2009, it was 17 cents for residential per kilowatt hour. It's a long ways from the 13 cents that you saw there. In 2010, it was 15.7, almost 16 cents. In 2008, it was 159, which is close to 16 cents per kilowatt hour. That's for residential. And commercial is higher, which is kind of like the opposite from other cities. Other cities give commercial a break. Because I know, because my apartment building, I'm paying close to 20, 21 cents per kilowatt hour. It just dropped 7% from last year. So the change from last year is great, and it appears good, but it is deceptive. And that's what I don't like about this presentation, even though there are many things for them to be commended. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may, before we move on, I do want to comment on the comments made by one of our speakers with regard to the legality of the city's position on allocating certain costs of the Gladys settlement, as well as the reallocation within GWP. Both of those methods, and I've read the settlement as well as the judgment of the court, it's perfectly legally defensible the way the city has proposed to structure the chargeback to the water department. It might not be something that the public wants or likes, but ultimately that's going to be a decision that the city council is going to have to make. And it's not going to be an easy decision because, as discussed, there are obviously costs that have to be borne and certain services that need to be provided to the public. But from a legal standpoint, we're fine with the method.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Madam President, well, I just want to comment on the use of comparison data by Burbank Water and Power. Mr. Steiker, could you help us understand if their data is appropriate? I know we're using their slides, but there's some discrepancy in terms of what the public is talking about.
There's no discrepancy. If Mr. Milano looks at the average customer of 500 kilowatt hours per month, he'll find that's the number.
Okay.
Plus, that's our number. The Burbank comparison had to do with rate of increase of rates over time. Their numbers were weighted averages. Numbers that we used beyond that to show what our averages are were specific to 500 kilowatt hour per month.
Yeah, I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Comments? Next item, please.
Item number 5, old business.
Wait.
Did we not have oral communications?
Item number 4, oral communications.
Mr. Harry Zavos, please.
Thank you, Commission. It's a lead into the comments I intended to make were what Mr. Yao said. He asked if, in fact, those areas, in fact, I brought them up here where GWP is giving value to the general fund without being reimbursed are calculated in this budget. The answer is no. I gave those items to Mr. Starbird 2 weeks ago. He's still studying them. Let me indicate what those were. One was giving 2/3 of the Perkins building rent-free to general fund departments, while GWP has to go out and lease commercial space to do their activities. Secondly is providing the entire water system, hydrants and everything, which has to do with fire protection, which is a GWP function. The operation of the ultra-hazard, providing the land for the ultra-hazard activity of the fire department at the utility operations center, and I forget the fourth one. That's not in this budget, but that brings up several questions which arise here. Where what we're trying to do is take that $4.2 million that was being transferred in violation of 218 and find some other way of moving those water fees, either through the electrical side or by way of reimbursement for legal fees or whatever, back into the general fund. And here are some of the things I have problems with. Number one, I understand that the Fairmont Street project that leads into Disney required that the utility operations center be completely configured, not to service the ratepayers, but to accommodate traffic. And my understanding is that that land, which is now Fairmont Street, which is a transportation function, belonged to GWP. And my understanding is, and I don't know, that's why I'm asking these questions, GWP never got reimbursed for that land. In addition to that, there is a certain amount of reconfiguring at the expense of GWP to accommodate those roads. Now we're talking about the allocation within departments. I understand there are millions of gallons of water that are used in the production of the electricity for cooling. Now, I don't know whether in terms of the internal audit, GWP, the Waterworks gets credit for that, and By the same token, to be fair, if running the waterworks requires electricity, that should be put into the formula if what we're going to do is clearly allocate the expenses between the two sides of GWP. One of the other things was, I saw the budget session, there was a $250 million item there for security for GWP facilities because of 9/11. And in the Wyndham report, they were going to charge, I think, $126,000 for the time that the helicopter is over GWP facilities. Now, my understanding is, and I've seen the cameras at the Utility Operations Center, that facility is monitored 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, with cameras all over the perimeter of the facility. My understanding is that there's a private security system that's on the ground and makes foot inspections. Now, how in the world is a helicopter high in the sky going to provide $126,000 worth of security that's better than 24/7 camera surveillance and your own private security guards patrolling the area? These are the kinds of questions that have to be asked, because what it comes down to, you can't make policy. Policy is made by the City Council. You can make recommendations to the City Council, and things should be transparent. If there are free electrical being given for street lights, the public should know that, because that is the ratepayers paying for a service which is a general fund service, and that's fine. 218 doesn't touch electrical. If that's what the city wants to do, that's fine, but the public should know about it.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano, please.
Thank you very much, Commissioner President Chen. My name is Herbert Milano. For many years, the City of Glendale has used the transfers of money from the Glendale Water and Power Reserves to the general fund as a budget balancing strategy. It wasn't always that way. It changed around the 1940s through the Charter Amendment. And they're very explicit with regard to what is adequate and transferable, because you have to maintain the utility needs first before you determine whether you make a transfer. And this is an argument that has been coming forth year after year for many years with regard to what is an appropriate transfer. I wish now that we had an independent, publicly owned utility so that the city would take care of its own budgetary issues internally. I have put together many charts with regard to the growth of the pensions as just one of those expenses. And I'll repeat them for you now. Through the 1990s, the City of Glendale paid, as part of its obligation to the pension fund, less than $6 million a year, year after year. Sometimes it was 5, 5.5, 5 3/4. Today, that rate, due to the changes in the pension system, is now $24 million. And in 2 years, it will go up to $42 million. That alone, more than anything else, has changed the dramatic impact with regard to how to balance the city's budget. And the back door, it's you. The back door is the Glendale Water and Power. So how does the city manage, or the Glendale Water and Power manage to basically make this possible? Increase rates to the utility customers for many years, except for this last year. Postponement of capital improvements to a severe extent, as it was reported in 2007, over $200 million in arrears on just the water utility. Borrowing through the issue of funds. The majority of the city's debt in bond is for the Glendale Water and Power. Doing away with conservative fiscal approach. You know, we used to pay as you go for decades. That changed about 12 years ago. And then violated the California Constitution Proposition 218 for many years. And that is the reason why the city attorney recommended to the city council to avoid the transfers. But for all intents and purposes, these transfers are being made possible through, I would call, less than transparent means. I have a copy of the Wilden report. And I was doing a study on one of the pages. It was kind of very interesting to me. And this is on page Exhibit C, where you actually see this 50-50 split that has no reasoning under any accounting concepts to be split 50-50. Customer services billing 50-50. Can't be. But that's just part of it. There's a whole range. Here the city needs to increase, according to its budget session, it needs to increase transfers from the electric by $2 million. So the utility and the utility customer is being impacted significantly. And I tried to get a sense of how much of an impact is it by trying to get the data, and they make the data, access to the data, incredibly prohibitive, costly, just to get basic information on how is it impacting it. And that's our reality. The reality is that people who are unemployed, people with limited financial means, are being impacted heavily by carrying those additional costs, which are higher than Pasadena and Burbank and LA. And because they're being impacted, these people need a break. And that's your prerogative to make that recommendation by looking at the data and asking for the information. You know, it's the whole concept of government really is about justice. At the end of the day, that's it. Are we being fair? Are we distributing our resources fair? Are we burdening the people properly? And that's what this is all about. It is my opinion that we have overextended so much on the pensions and benefits and other post-employment obligations that we are using the electrical utility as a backdoor that impacts a significant number of people. And I cannot even get at the data to really get us, how impacted are they? Because it's being prevented. And I'm calling you, the GWP Commission, to assist me in that quest to figure out how impacted are these residents with regard to the way that we are charging them for electricity and water. Thank you.
Thank you. Comment? Okay. Next item, please.
Item 5, old business.
This may not be an issue of old business. Maybe it belongs to the agenda forecast. But as you know, there was a terrible disaster in Japan with an earthquake recently, and it might be timely to re-examine the emergency preparedness measures that we have here in the utility. So I just want to make that suggestion.
We have a very solid emergency plan, and we do review it. So there is a procedure for that.
Okay.
I was actually had a note here to bring it up as a agenda forecast item.
Oh,
to
well,
review it.
Okay. Well,
or have it presented to us so that we can
do that.
I thought maybe I had brought this up in a previous meeting, but perhaps not. So.
Sounds like we have two that are interested, so we can go ahead.
We can put that on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else, right? Old business? We can go to the next item.
Item number 6, new business agenda forecast.
When do you want it?
It's been suggested that we try to identify a date for the emergency preparedness. I see next month is very busy, and that you may want some more extra time to make the presentation anyway.
July looks like it would work.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to also put on the agenda the Grayson evaluation on one of these as a target date?
What we can do is tentatively place it. I want to make sure we have the right information.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, we can tentatively place it for July, with the possibility it may spill over to.
Sure.
What's the public hearing, Ray Water? Is that the water management plan? Is it scheduled for June?
That has to do with the rate redesign.
Sounds like it's the urban water management plan.
Is it?
The June item, public hearing, Ray Water.
Oh, yeah.
That is something that is, if at all possible, we need the Commission to have that hearing on that day. The urban water management plan needs to be adopted by City Council before the end of the fiscal year, and we're bringing it to you first for a public hearing before we go to City Council. So we're targeting that date and really hopeful we can get a majority of the commissioners here.
That has nothing to do with the rate redesign.
It has nothing to do with a rate redesign. It's a mandated update on our water resource availability that is mandated by the state to be done every 5 years.
Water rate redesign also brought to the Commission in June. It may have to be in a special workshop. Let's talk about that.
So isn't it a top item, update water rate design? It might be crossed off for a different session?
No, what we'll do is we'll do an update at the Commission meeting and schedule a separate workshop for that later in the month.
Would that be a joint workshop that we discussed before with the City Council?
We'll try. We'll try for a joint workshop.
I mean, if depending on these two hearings and what sort of public involvement, we might want to shift something off of June to the future, just to allow room.
Anything else? No? Okay. Next item, please.
Be here next week.
Item 7, adjournment.
Have a motion?
I'll second the motion.
I need a motion.
Oh.
So
I was
moved.
wondering about that.
So moved,
Okay.
John. It could be John.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn. Pardon my
It'll be our last
error.
meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. No objections? Okay. Motion holds. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.